What kind of democracy is that? What kind of freedom is that? What kind of social or political system is it when a black man has no voice in court? And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, it's time out for you and me to stop running away from the wolf right into the arms of the fox, looking for some kind of help.
Malcolm X was a powerful African-American civil rights leader, minister, and influential figure in the fight for black empowerment and justice. Born Malcolm Little in Omaha, Nebraska, he overcame a difficult early life marked by racism, family separation, and incarceration. While in prison, he educated himself and converted to the Nation of Islam, adopting the name Malcolm X to represent the loss of his African heritage. As a spokesperson for the nation, he gained a reputation for his passionate, sometimes controversial stance on black nationalism, self-defense, and independence. His views evolved after a pilgrimage to Mecca in 1964, where he embraced a more inclusive approach to racial justice, advocating for global human rights. Tragically, Malcolm X was assassinated in 1965 in New York City. His legacy endures, inspiring movements worldwide to challenge oppression and advocate for equality.
Malcolm X was born in America during the Jazz Age, a time of rampant racism, a time when African Americans were treated as second-class citizens and had few opportunities for advancement. Early in his short life, Malcolm worked at a variety of menial jobs, eventually turning to a life of crime. He spent years in prison. Then he converted to Islam and became a voice of hope for many African Americans even today.
There has been much written and said about your departure from the Black Muslim organization. Could you tell us exactly why you did leave the organization?
Well, the exact I didn't leave, number one. I was put out, no matter, and since there was no justification for them putting me out, they had to make it appear to the public that I left of my own volition. But it was in February of 1963 that Wallace Muhammad, one of the sons of El-Hajj Muhammad, pointed out to me that his father had a very serious moral problem, which he had kept a careful secret up to that point. But that when I heard about it, I went directly to El-Hajj Muhammad. We discussed it. He explained it. He even admitted it to me, as well as to his some of his other children. He discussed it with his other children. But when he gave me his religious interpretation or explanation of it, I accepted it. But about 5 months went by, and Wallace pulled me aside again and told me that his father hadn't changed. He was still involved in the same thing, and he was getting worse rather than better. And I think it had a serious effect upon me, subconsciously, if not consciously.
Personally ordered attacks upon you?
Oh, yes. In Cassius Clay, the brother that used to be the secretary to Cassius, or as Elijah Muhammad now calls him, Muhammad Ali Clay, was beaten in Boston recently, and this brother was a captain. He was one of the karate experts who taught karate on the entire East Coast, Eastern region, and he was in the inner circle. And he pointed out that in October, he didn't cease being a captain, but his influence or authority was placed beneath that of Clarence, the captain who's in Boston. Clarence was put over Joseph, and shortly after that, as Leon Amir testified, Clarence, the captain from Boston, and John, the captain from Springfield, Massachusetts, came to New York to carry out this so-called assassination. And they came to Leon looking for a silencer for their gun. Well, see, I understand all of it, but they parked half a block from my house here in the home of Alvin, who's also one of Elijah Muhammad's men, looking for a chance when they could, make their move. But thanks to Allah, they didn't get a chance.
Only Malcolm X's autobiography seemed to offer something different. His repeated acts of self-creation spoke to me the blunt poetry of his words. His insistence on respect promised a new and uncompromising order, martial in its discipline, forged through sheer force of will. All the other stuff, the talk of blue-eyed devils and apocalypse, was incidental to that program, I decided. Religious baggage that Malcolm himself seemed to have safely abandoned towards the end of his life. And yet, even as I imagined myself following Malcolm's call, one line in the book stayed with me. For he spoke of a wish he'd once had, the wish that the white blood that ran through him there by an act of violence might somehow be expunged. I knew that for Malcolm, that wish would never be incidental. I knew as well that traveling down the road to self-respect my own white blood would never recede into mere abstraction. So I was left to wonder what else I would be severing if and when I left my mother and my grandparents at some uncharted border. And two, if Malcolm's discovery towards the end of his life that some whites might live beside him as brothers in Islam seemed to offer some hope of eventual reconciliation, that hope appeared in a distant future, in a far-off land. Where were the people who would work towards this future and populate this new world? After a basketball at the university one day, Ray and I happened to strike up a conversation with a tall, gaunt man named Malik, who played with us now and again. Malik mentioned that he was a follower of the Nation of Islam, but that since Malcolm had died and he had moved to Hawaii, he no longer went to mosque or political meetings, although he still sought comfort in solitary prayer. One of the guys sitting nearby must have overheard us, for he leaned over with a sagacious expression on his face. "Y'all talking about Malcolm, huh?" "Malcolm tells us like it is, no doubt about it." "Yeah," another guy said, "but I tell you what, you won't see me moving to no African jungle anytime soon. Or some goddamn desert somewhere sitting on a carpet with a bunch of Arabs. No, sir. And you won't see me stop eating no ribs either. Gotta have them ribs. And pussy too. Don't Malcolm talk about no pussy? Now you know that ain't gonna work." I noticed Ray laughing and looked at him sternly. "What are you laughing at?" I said to him. "You never even read Malcolm. You don't even know what he says." Ray grabbed the basketball out of my hand and headed for the opposite rim. "I don't need no books to tell me how to be black," he shouted over his head. I started to answer, then turned to Malik, expecting some words of support. But the Muslim said nothing, his bony face set in a faraway smile.
This is American justice. This is American democracy. And those of you who are familiar with it know that in America, I was born in America, in Omaha, Nebraska. Malcolm. Well, easy I can explain it. Well, just a moment. When you ask me about my name, if a Chinese were to come in here and say his name was Patrick Murphy, you'd know that somewhere along the line he got in trouble or fell by the wayside. Because that's not a Chinese name. No. If a Chinese person has no business with an Irishman's name, if a yellow man looks absurd wearing a white man's name, it's even more absurd for a black man to have a white man's name. The Negroes, and you ask for an explanation, you can take my explanation. If you want it, take it the way I give it to you, or you don't want it. The Negroes in this country who have English names, those names represent the last slave master who owned their grandparents. It is not their name. It is the slave master's name. So when we become Muslims, sir, and we turn back toward our own culture, we reject, we cut aside completely those things that stigmatize us in this country. X also represents the unknown, and I think you will agree that the history of the black man, before he was brought to this country, you'll find that he came from Africa, which had a Muslim culture and Muslim civilization, a great part of it. And the Mali Empire stretched from the Nile River over to the shores of West Africa. That was a Muslim empire. The Moorish Empire was Muslim. The empires that existed in northern Nigeria were Muslim. Kano, one of the oldest cities in Africa, was a Muslim city 500 years before Columbus discovered America. So now when you ask me how, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who is teaching the black people in this country that the only way that we can solve the race problem is not by forcing ourselves upon the white man, but by doing something for ourselves, teaches us also that we'll never have the incentive or the desire to do anything for ourselves until we first learn something about ourselves, about our past.
What Malcolm X did that drew so many people to him was he had an energy that was urgent and young, and I think he triggered a certain kind of action in people, a certain kind of self-esteem that I'm worthy of challenging the status quo.
Oh. Let me ask you, Mr. X, why did you visit Fidel Castro this morning?
Well, you have to understand it like this. Because of the climate that has been produced by the trouble in Africa, in the Congo, in Kenya, and other places, it has caused a great deal of tension in Harlem. And based on that, some representatives from the 28th Precinct a few weeks ago visited our restaurant, and they were discussing these incidents that stemmed from this tension, and they asked us for suggestions on some of the best ways to combat it. So we suggested that they, instead of condemning the leaders of these different nationalist groups, that they get all of them together at the Amsterdam News Office, where they have the 28th Precinct Community Council at the Amsterdam News Office. I think it's once a month. So that they took this suggestion, and at this meeting about 3 or 4 weeks ago, a sort of a working unity was brought about by the editor of the Amsterdam News and Captain Noonan of the 28th Precinct and Patrolman Sosis, who handles, I think, the public relations or something or other. So it was suggested that working with just that element wasn't sufficient, but to get that element of leaders together with the civic leaders, the business leaders, and whatnot there in Harlem. So last Friday, a meeting was held at the Amsterdam News Office, presided over by James Hicks, the editor, and Captain Noonan and Sosis, and I think Inspector Whalen was there, and Lieutenant Seeley. Plus, there was Commissioner Dumpson of the Department of Welfare, and Dr. Alfred Morrow, the ex-commissioner, and John B. King, Reverend Dempsey, the mayor on Harlem, Dr. Allen, Nathan Friedman, and Vernell Pemberton, assistants to the superintendent of districts. There was Norman Saunders from the mayor's committee was there, and
I believe you, Mr.
Well,
X.
all right.
Go ahead.
I want you to know who was there, so you'll know why I was in Fidel Castro's room. Since you want to know, we'll get the details. One of the first things that was brought up at this meeting was that there were many African dignitaries being brought to America during the UN session, and that these African dignitaries would want to visit Harlem. And the 28th Precinct, or the police department, was very concerned that there wouldn't be a repetition of the incident that took place when President Sékou Touré of Guinea was there. So they were asking for suggestions, and it was brought out that one of the primary reasons that this incident took place was because of improper representation on the committee or whatever it was that brought him there. There was just one element involved in the bringing of him there. Therefore, it left a lot of dissatisfied elements, and that those different ingredients caused a combustion of booing and so forth that was embarrassing. So it was suggested that a committee be set up. And this committee was supposed to be representative of all of the elements in Harlem. The nationalist elements, the Christian elements, the fraternal elements, the business elements, and so forth. And I was selected on that committee to be responsible for representing and welcoming any dignitary that came to Harlem. And when the meeting was breaking up, I asked Mr. Hicks about how to form the thing together, and he said, well, since your name was mentioned, you take the initiative in getting the others together. So then what night was that? Last night? Monday night. Monday night, we heard that Fidel Castro was coming to the Teresa, which was unbelievable.
He had a do bill that didn't work at the Shelburne.
Well, that's what somebody said, but I'm inclined not to go along with everything that I hear. So we went to the Teresa, and when we got there, the place was packed, jammed, and there was a lot of confusion and excitement. Now, I would like to state right here that one of the reasons that we were selected, or the Muslims were selected to be represented on any committee that had anything to do with representing any dignitaries to Harlem, the police department recognizes the fact that out of all of the groups in Harlem, those who are the most, you can't find a better disciplined group, or a more, I don't care what propaganda you say about us, you can't find a more disciplined group or a group that's more law-abiding than the followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and you can't find a group that's more cooperative with law enforcement officers. And so when this jam occurred there at the Teresa, the police officials, we could never have been in the Teresa had not the police allowed us there. They put out the reporters, they put out everyone, but they allowed us to stay there because Inspector Whalen was at the meeting when this committee was set up. And since he's responsible for all of the safety of the dignitaries, I think in the 10th Division, he let the committee that was selected stay in the Teresa Hotel.
Mr. X, I believe you. I still ask the question.
I'm giving you some background. I don't intend to leave anything out because I've had sufficient...
We've only got 2 hours.
I understand.
We have other guests, Mr. X.
All right.
Democracy is one of the precepts of your organization.
It is, sir.
Free speech for everyone?
Yes, sir. But you can take... see, I came because Mr. Kirschenbaum...
I've heard of him.
...told me that he wanted an objective report, and I don't think that whenever you are involved with a man as controversial as Dr. Castro and as controversial as the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, you don't just make statements that you don't explain, because people take them and twist them and make more out of them than what you mean.
I'm listening.
Now,
so you were at the Teresa.
So we left. After they had brought Dr. Castro in, we left. And then we received a call at our restaurant at 116th and Lenox. I got to get that plug in. Best restaurant in New York.
You'll pay for that, pal.
And they asked us to come to the Teresa Hotel that Dr. Castro wanted to see us. I was shocked.
Yeah.
And but we got the committee together and went back. When we went back with the Muslims, the police let us through their lines.
Right.
We were led by them up to the 9th floor and into Dr. Castro's room. And he greeted us very cordially, and he greeted us very cordially. We sat down. The room wasn't so big, and in fact, it was crowded with his entourage. And we were allowed to take in, I think, about 5, 2 Negro reporters, and a cameraman, and 4 of the brothers, and so that.
In case of war with Russia or China, would you encourage your people to go and fight for America?
In case of war with Russia or China, would we encourage, you mean the black people in America, to fight in defense of America? Black people in this country have fought to defend America ever since America has been America, and black people in this country still don't have the freedom, the justice, and equality that they thought that they were fighting for when they were fighting to defend America.
But would they fight again for America?
Who knows what the black man who has now awakened will do. When the black man was asleep, he was anyone's tool. He was anyone's watchdog. He was anyone's hound dog, hunting dog. But today the black man in America is beginning to think for himself. And as he begins to think for himself, he begins to ask himself, what is he fighting for? And what has he gotten out of all of the fighting that he has already done? And as the black man begins to ask himself this question, then you'll find that many of them begin to wonder, what do they have to fight for? Now, as Muslims, we don't teach. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad doesn't teach us to fight or not to fight. He wakes us up and lets us know what's in store for America. And then anyone who wants to fight in defense of America, it's entirely up to them. But America's next battle will be against God himself.
But would you, Malcolm X...
I, as an individual, Malcolm X, would never fight for America.
If it's false propaganda, why, for instance, should it have been propagated by Malcolm X?
I like this. I'm not trying to be funny, and I hope the people don't laugh.
Sure.
But I barely got out of high school, and the word propagated by Malcolm X. What do you mean with
well, I mean, Malcolm X came back as you know, from the Mideast, and renounced the movement of Elijah Muhammad precisely on the grounds that it was not the same kind of Islam faith which he found very attractive.
Well, I would like to say one thing about, I don't know too much about what he saw, but he was there in 1959, I think, before, and he saw that there were white Muslims. But Malcolm X got famous mainly being hard on people like you, white people, white devils, you blue-eyed, blonde-headed dog. Oh, he got famous like this. And he had made so many white enemies. Whites cared nothing about Malcolm, nor so-called Negroes when he was with Elijah Muhammad. But they seemed to love and follow dead leaders, people. But I would like to say this.
The white people didn't kill him.
No, I would like to say this. He was a man, everything he had came from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And when he denounced or was put out for various reasons of the faith, then he had to, from what I understood, this is me talking, I'll be to blame if I say anything wrong, he had to get back with you all. And he, in other words, he seemed to be apologizing for things that he had said because the protection of Allah and the Muslims were not with him. But I would like to say that we
you think that he tried to make himself pleasing to the white community
this
because he had antagonized
This is
Elijah
me
Muhammad.
talking. This is not antagonize him, but antagonize you.
No, but you say that...
I would like to say that whites jumped right behind him. They're making a book about him. There's required reading in all colleges now, and they're making a movie about him and projecting him as the leader. And if you read his book and see the movie that's coming out, it'll make you hate Elijah Muhammad and the Muslims. Mainly, this is done to turn the black people against the real leader. And I like to say that this is the way white people rule. This is your history. Divide and conquer. See, the first whites, your fathers, when they came over, they co-chiefs that running bulls stole his horses. Then after they got through fighting, and they came in and took over. And whites have always put one against another. And now they have a dead man who was nothing but and he admitted himself, Malcolm, was a tramp, had white women selling the body for him. He was nothing until the Honorable Elijah Muhammad made him great. Made him great. Taught him, even his name, X, come from Elijah. He gave him his name. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad was an established leader before he was born. Now you seem to try to make it look like he was a leader and he was powerful. Everything I have, let me say one thing. I barely got out of school. I got out of school mainly because I was a champion. I actually didn't pass. I won't name the teachers that put me through. But you are a wise man. You're an intelligent man. And if I was not a Muslim or follower of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I couldn't talk to you for 2 minutes. And I believe I can hold my own as an intelligent conversation with you. But it all comes from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. But people praise me. Oh, you should be the leader. Well, you don't have to follow Elijah. Man, are you a fool? Everything I got come from him. He taught me who I was. He made me proud. He made me fearless. He made me love my own. I've turned down millions and to keep from selling out my people. The beautiful name Muhammad Ali. I now have 56 Muslim invitations by governments. All they ask me about when I go to those countries, how is Elijah Muhammad? White people, twice a day, 65 and 70, their bus stop in front of Elijah Muhammad's house, hoping to get a glimpse of him. And you cannot destroy me like you have other big ministers of his in the past by telling us, oh, you speak good, you should be the leader. See, this is to get me thinking that I'm smart. And as soon as I leave Elijah, you can get me. But as long as I stay with Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I'm safe. And if Malcolm X had stayed with the man that made him great, taught him everything he knew, today he'd been big, big, big. But as soon as, in other words, how can I come to your son and say you are wrong for spanking him when you fed him, you clothed him, you gave him his name, you birthed him in the world? Who am I to come in and be the judge and say, why did you spank that boy? You taught him, you have a right to spank him. And Malcolm X did some things. He said something about Kennedy that he shouldn't have said. 130 whites died tragically on a jet. He praised it. And Honorable Elijah Muhammad is not the kind of man to ordain it. So he had to spank him. And after you white people had told him how good he talked, he should be the leader, he couldn't take the spanking. He had to run out and start him a movement, and that's when you destroyed it. You understand? See, so I would say whites destroyed Malcolm X.
I understand what you say.
I understand
what you say, And I don't doubt either the sincerity or the eloquence of your tribute to Elijah Muhammad, but I do think that assuming that we are prepared to question the divinity of Elijah Muhammad, then one has to assume that somebody like Malcolm X, when he turned against him, might have been doing so for honest, sincere reasons. That is to say, he might have thought, well, I've been following this man for a number of years, but all of a sudden, I have reached a level of understanding which permits me to see that he's pretty human after all, and that beyond a certain point, he doesn't have anything to teach me.
He should have always known that he was human, and not having nothing to teach him.
Some people treat him as though he were divine, you know.
Yeah, well,
the way they did Father Divine would be another example.
And we don't talk about dead people. They're dead and they're gone.
Who's dead?
Malcolm X is dead.
Oh, yes.
And we follow Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who is the boss. And we'd rather not to stay here on the show and waste a lot of time arguing about a dead black man when whites are our common enemies.
Well, no doubt, of course, he teaches you that, and no doubt you understand.
We don't have to teach it. You don't have to teach a black man that whites is his enemies.
Well, you see, from my point of view, what Elijah Muhammad is doing to you is diseasing your mind. You sit and tell me that we white people like to divide and conquer.
You do.
I grew up as a white child. I heard much more talk against Democrats than I did against black people. And I grant there's a lot of division in the sense that Republicans are divided.
Democrats and Republicans don't lynch each other and castrate each other, and burn each other, and tar and feather each other, and rape and slave for 400 years.
Now wait a minute. This is.
I would like to ask you a question. I'd like to ask you a question. Who, 22 million black people in America, who would you say our everyday common enemy is? What other country or what nationality? I mean, you know, you have the nerve to be on a TV show like this and look at me like I'm wrong for saying Elijah Muhammad is poisoning you by telling you that we're your enemies. And I feel it and see it every day. And every black man watching this show know you are enemies. And you have the nerve to stand up here and say Elijah Muhammad is poisoning my mind. He cannot teach us that you are enemy. You taught us. And your people daily, Martin Luther King is bumped off unjustly. Adam Clayton Powers bumped off unjustly. They took my title unjustly. They killed Medgar Evers unjustly. All the integrators who love white folks was unjustly kicked out of Washington. They've been deprived of education and poverty throughout the country. They just came back from Vietnam, 12 boys in Chicago, and they sat on the television and they told how white soldiers are teaching Viet Congs to hate them. They fly rebel communist flags, and they doing everything that they can to them right there in Vietnam. Now you're going to tell me that Elijah Muhammad and trying to make the public think that he's poisoning me by teaching us the truth. Here's his latest newspaper.
Now wait a minute.
Here's his latest. Don't hold it there. Here's his latest newspaper. Muhammad Speaks. Now it's full of truth. You can get the paper in every city. You can buy Muhammad Speaks. And if this, I mean, you're a wise man, but I don't think you're too much wiser than the ones who run the country in the White House.
Much wiser.
No.
Let me try to make this point.
No one challenges nothing he teaches. You're intelligent, I'm intelligent. We all know he's here. So I'm not here to tell you something you don't know about.
No. I'm simply telling you that you believe something which I happen to know isn't true.
Now hold it. See, what is it that I believe?
You believe
it's not true.
You believe that the entire white community is your enemy. I happen to know it's not your enemy. I doubt if there's anybody in this room who is your enemy.
I'll tell you what.
But I do believe that just as Hitler persuaded all the Germans to believe that all of the Jews were their enemy, that the people are engaged in spreading this kind of virulence, and that some very, very sincere people get caught up in it. You're an example of it. And under the circumstances, you end up doing a disservice to the cause that you really want to serve.
Would you say Martin Luther King doing a disservice?
What is the relevance of that remark? Just whether you went to school or not, explain to me the relevance of that remark.
No, I'm asking you the question. You said I'm doing a disservice.
You mean because he was killed by a white man?
No.
So why say Malcolm X was killed by a black man?
I'm not talking about that.
So what else is new?
No, you're getting upset. I'm not talking about that.
Well,
all I asked you was Elijah Muhammad is doing a disservice or whatever it is that he's doing.
Yeah.
Well,
at one level he's doing this.
What's the level?
At the level of trying to persuade people that all white people are the same and despise Negro people.
All right, now number one.
At the level in which he urges you to self-pride and the rest of it, he's doing you a great service.
Let's look at some of the things he's doing.
Excuse me 1 second, be right with you.
Mr. Muhammad teaches us that man is judged by his conscious behavior, and the conscious behavior collectively of the white race toward non-white people has been the type of behavior that is practiced only by a devil or devils.
So that in essence you feel that white men per se are devils?
He teaches us that God told him that the white race is a race of devils.
Teaching this kind of a doctrine of hate and a doctrine of separationism is bound to inflame the passions of people, wouldn't you imagine?
The deeds that the white man has committed against black people is what is inflaming black people. There's no teaching inflames anyone. It's what you do to a man that inflames him. And if the white man wants black people to love him, then he should do something to warrant that love.
The entire Negro population, the group, feels the way you do about it. I think they're probably more than willing to take their share of the world that's available to them and enjoy themselves in it.
How about you?
I have no comment on this.
If he doesn't think that very many Negroes think like I do, then he is being mighty naive. Do you think that Negroes are going to continue to live in a society where dogs can be sicked on them at will and not do something about it? You're out of your mind.
Is there anyone here that would like to comment after having heard what Mr. X said?
No, I didn't.
How about you, sir? Would you like to comment?
I don't agree with him because I'm not a follower of Muhammad myself. I think that all people have been mistreated in some form or another. But I don't agree with him. I don't follow Muhammad. I don't think anyone should follow one man. I think they should follow their own conscience. I think the main problem of most Negroes is that they feel sorry for themselves, and I think that this keeps them back much more than they would be if they didn't feel so sorry for themselves.
If Martin Luther King, Roy Wilkins, or any of these compromising Negroes who say exactly what the white man wants to hear is interviewed anywhere in the country, you don't get anybody to offset what they say. But whenever a black man stands up and says something that white people don't like, then the first thing that white man does is run around to try and find somebody to say something to offset what has just been said. This is natural, but it is...
Malcolm X, one of the most articulate exponents of the black Muslim philosophy, has said of your movement and your philosophy that it plays into the hands of the white oppressors, that they are happy to hear you talk about love for the oppressor because this disarms the Negro and fits into the stereotype of the Negro as a neat, turning the other cheek sort of creature. Would you care to comment on Mr. X's beliefs?
Well, I don't think of love as, in this context, as emotional bosh. I don't think of it as a weak force. But I think of love as something strong and that organizes itself into powerful direct action. This is what I tried to teach in the struggle in the South, that we are not engaged in a struggle that means we sit down and do nothing. That there's a great deal of difference between non-resistance to evil and non-violent resistance. Non-resistance leaves you in a state of stagnant passivity and deadened complacency, wherein non-violent resistance means that you do resist in a very strong and determined manner. And I think some of the criticisms of nonviolence, or some of the critics, fail to realize that we are talking about something very strong, and they confuse non-resistance with nonviolent resistance.
He goes beyond that in some of the things I've heard him say, to say that this is deliberately your philosophy of love of the oppressor, which he identifies completely with the nonviolent movement is, he says, is this philosophy and this movement are actually encouraged by whites because it makes them comfortable. It makes them believe that the Negroes are meek, supine creatures.
Well, I don't think that's true. If anyone has ever lived with a nonviolent movement in the South, from Montgomery on through the Freedom Rides and through the sit-in movement and the recent Birmingham movement, and see the reactions of many of the extremists and reactionaries in the white community, he wouldn't say that this movement makes, or this philosophy makes them comfortable. I think it arouses a sense of shame within them often, in many instances. I think it does something to touch the conscience and establish a sense of guilt. Now, so often people respond to guilt by engaging more in the guilt-evoking act in an attempt to drown the sense of guilt. But this approach certainly doesn't make the white man feel comfortable. I think it does the other thing. It disturbs this conscience, and it disturbs this sense of contentment that he's had.
You make my point. That as long as a white man does it, it's all right. A black man is supposed to have no feelings. But when a black man strikes back, he's an extremist. He's supposed to sit passively and have no feelings, be nonviolent, and love his enemy. No matter what kind of attack, be it verbal or otherwise, he's supposed to take it. But if he stands up and in any way tries to defend himself, then he's an extremist. No, I think that the speaker who preceded me is getting exactly what he asked for. My reason for believing in extremism, intelligently directed extremism, extremism in defense of liberty, extremism in quest of justice, is because I firmly believe in my heart that the day that the black man takes an uncompromising step and realizes that he's within his rights, when his own freedom is being jeopardized, to use any means necessary to bring about his freedom or put a halt to that injustice, I don't think he'll be by himself. I live in America where there are only 22 million blacks against probably 160 million whites. One of the reasons that I'm in no way reluctant or hesitant to do whatever is necessary to see that black people do something to protect themselves, I honestly believe that the day that they do, many whites will have more respect for them, and that there will be more whites on their side than are now on their side with these little wishy-washy love thy enemy approach that they've been using up to now. And if I'm wrong, then you're a racialist. As I said earlier, in my conclusion, I'm a Muslim. I believe in the religion of Islam. I believe in Allah. I believe in Muhammad. I believe in all of the prophets. I believe in fasting, prayer, charity, and that which is incumbent upon a Muslim to fulfill in order to be a Muslim. In April, I was fortunate to make the Hajj to Mecca and went back again in September to try and carry out my religious functions and requirements. But at the same time that I believe in that religion, I have to point out I'm also an American Negro. And I live in a society whose social system is based upon the castration of the black man, whose political system is based on castration of the black man, and whose economy is based upon the castration of the black man. A society which in 1964 has more subtle, deceptive, deceitful methods to make the rest of the world think that it's cleaning up its house, while at the same time the same things are happening to us in 1964 that happened in 1954, 1924, and in 1984. They came up with what they call a civil rights bill in 1964, supposedly to solve our problem, and after the bill was signed, 3 civil rights workers were murdered in cold blood. And the FBI head, Hoover, admits that they know who did it. They've known ever since it happened, and they've done nothing about it. Civil rights bill down the drain. No matter how many bills pass, black people in that country, where I'm from, still our lives are not worth 2 cents. And the government has shown its inability, or either its unwillingness, to do whatever is necessary to protect life and property where the black American is concerned. So my contention is that whenever a people come to the conclusion that the government which they have supported proves itself unwilling or proves itself unable to protect our lives and protect our property because we have the wrong color skin, we are not human beings unless we ourselves band together and do whatever, however, whenever is necessary to see that our lives and our property is protected. And I doubt that any person in here would refuse to do the same thing were he in the same position, or I should say were he in the same condition. One step farther to see am I justified in this stance. And I say, I'm speaking as a black man from America, which is a racist society. No matter how much you hear it talk about democracy, it's as racist as South Africa, or as racist as Portugal, or as racist as any other racialist society on this earth. The only difference between it and South Africa preaches separation and practices separation. America preaches integration and practices segregation. This is the only difference. They don't practice what they preach. Whereas South Africa preaches and practices the same thing. I have more respect for a man who lets me know where he stands, even if he's wrong, than the one who comes up like an angel and is nothing but a devil. The system of government that America has consists of committees. There are 16 senatorial committees that govern the country and 20 congressional committees. 10 of the 16 senatorial committees are in the hands of Southern racialist senators who are racialists. 13 of the 20, this was before the last election. I think it's even more so now. 10 of the 16 committees, senatorial committees, are in the hands of senators who are Southern racialists. 13 of the 20 congressional committees were in the hands of Southern congressmen who are racialists, which means out of the 36 committees that govern the foreign and domestic direction of that government, 23 are in the hands of Southern racialists, men who in no way believe in the equality of man, and men who do anything within their power to see that the black man never gets to the same seat or to the same level that they are on. The reason that these men from that area have that type of power is because America has a seniority system. And these who have that seniority have been there longer than anyone else because the black people in the areas where they live can't vote. And it is only because the black man is deprived of his vote that puts these men in positions of power that gives them such influence in the government beyond their actual intellectual or political ability, or even beyond the number of people from the areas that they represent. So we can see in that country that no matter what the federal government professes to be doing, the power of the federal government lies in these committees. And any time a black man or any kind of legislation is proposed to benefit the black man or give the black man his just due, we find that it's locked up in these committees right here. And when they let something through the committee, usually it is so chopped up and fixed up that by the time it becomes law, it's a law that can't be enforced. Well, another example is the Supreme Court desegregation decision that was handed down in 1954. This is a law. And this law, they have not been able to implement this law in New York City or in Boston or in Cleveland or Chicago or the northern cities. And my contention is that any time you have a country, supposedly a democracy, supposedly the land of the free and the home of the brave, and it can't enforce laws, even in the northernmost cosmopolitan and progressive part of it, that will benefit a black man, if those laws can't be enforced, or that law can't be enforced, how much heart do you think we will get when they pass some civil rights legislation which only involves more laws? If they can't enforce this law, they'll never enforce those laws. So my contention is that we are faced with a racialistic society, a society in which they are deceitful, deceptive, and the only way we can bring about a change is to talk the kind of language, speak the language that they understand. The racialist never understands a peaceful language. The racialist never understands the nonviolent language. The racialist, he's spoken his language to us for 400 years. We have been the victim of his brutality. We are the ones who face his dogs that tear the flesh from our limbs, only because we want to enforce the Supreme Court decision. We are the ones who have our skulls crushed, not by the Ku Klux Klan, but by policemen, only because we want to enforce what they call the Supreme Court decision. We are the ones upon whom water hoses are turned with pressure so hard that it rips the clothes from our back. Not men, but the clothes from the backs of women and children. You've seen it yourself. Only because we want to enforce what they call the law. Well, anytime you live in a society supposedly based upon law, and it doesn't enforce its own law because the color of a man's skin happens to be wrong, then I say those people are justified to resort to any means necessary to bring about justice where the government can't give them justice. I don't believe in any form of unjustified extremism, but I believe that when a man is exercising extremism, a human being is exercising extremism in defense of liberty for human beings, it's no vice. And when one is moderate in the pursuit of justice for human beings, I say he's a sinner. And I might add in my conclusion, in fact, America is one of the best examples when you read its history about extremism. Old Patrick Henry said liberty or death. That's extreme. Very extreme. I read once, passingly, about a man named Shakespeare. I only read about him passingly, but I remember one thing he wrote that kind of moved me. He put it in the mouth of Hamlet, I think it was, who said, to be or not to be. He was in doubt about something. Whether it was nobler in the mind of man to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, moderation, or to take up arms against the sea of troubles and by opposing, end them. And I go for that. If you take up arms, you'll end it. But if you sit around and wait for the one who's in power to make up his mind that he should end it, you'll be...
But one in particular, Malcolm, it is true, made attempts to reach the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. We don't know if his calls were being intercepted. We don't know if his mail was being intercepted. We don't know what government operatives worked between Malcolm and his spiritual father. I have, for the most part, not spoken on this subject because I am still waiting for my meeting with the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And until I have that meeting with him, there are things that I would like to hear from him. And there are things, as a son would say, that I would like to say to him. And I don't think I should say them to you before I say them to him. And some of you might not agree with that. I believe I understand Brother Malcolm more today than I have ever understood him before. I was not in the Nation of Islam 30 years ago. I was in my mid-teens at that time, down in Houston, Texas, and had not yet moved on to the university where I would meet the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan as a young student leader there in New Orleans. So there are many things on my heart, but I think if you will permit me to be just a little wise today, it would be better, and I'm sure if you will weigh it, you would agree with me. I don't know how long it will take. It's been over a year. But during that year, I have not said as little as a word, nor as much as a sentence against my spiritual father, the Honorable Minister Louis Farrakhan. And no matter what I have on my heart, again, I think it should be said between father and son, behind closed doors, and some resolution made behind closed doors before I come back to the broader community and the broader family. I have many questions to ask. Keene College was not a speech where I stood up to condemn my teacher. Keene College was not a speech where I was going into his domestic life. Keene College was a speech, as all of my speeches, where I was giving the white man hell, and I will continue to do that, and I make no apology for that. And so I'm still tender about that subject. Jews, so-called Jews, outside of that auditorium calling for his death. I was in a war spirit and a war posture, and I felt that I did what was right, felt that I should have even done more. It should have gone beyond the rostrum and should have been taken outside, as we did in Los Angeles when we drove them away from the convention center and drove them running down the streets. I wonder what would have been done then. So for the president to come out, Bill, Willie, Slick Willie, the vice president, the United States Senate to vote unanimously against me, for the first time the House of Representatives and the full Congress, and all of the mayors and governors and city councils and state assemblies and Negro organizations and Negro preachers, Ben Chavis, Reverend Behind, Reverend Butts, some of the other Negroes who came out against me, Jesse Louis Jackson, who called the white folks, they didn't have to call him, he called them. Ben Chavis bragged in this city on TV how he was the first to call Minister Farrakhan to say something needed to be done about college. All of that, and my last word, what's on my heart, I'll have to hold. As the old folks say, I'm just going to tarry a while.
That in the same context that Mr. Elijah Muhammad teaches that his faith, that the Islamic faith is for the black man and that the black man is good. He also uses the Old Testament instance of the serpent and Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, and he sets up the proposition there that this is the great battle between good and evil, and he uses the phrase devils.
Yeah.
And he uses it almost interchangeably and synonymous with the word snake. Now, what does he mean there?
Well, number one, he teaches us that that never was a real serpent.
It was not a real serpent
that went into the garden.
What was it?
But as you know, the Bible is written in symbols and parables, and this serpent or snake is a symbol that's used to hide the real identity of the one whom that actually was.
Well, who was it?
The white man.
I want to call your attention, Minister Malcolm, to one paragraph in this column. He says, and I quote him, "The only people born of Allah are the black nation. of whom the so-called American Negroes are descendants.
Yes.
Now, is this your standard teaching?
Yes. He teaches us that the black man by nature is divine.
Now, does this mean that the white man by nature is evil?
By nature, he is other than divine.
Well, now, does this mean that he's evil? Can he do good?
By nature, he is evil.
He cannot do good.
History is best qualified to reward all research, and we don't have any historic example where we have found that they collectively, as a people, have done good.
And you have a certified parochial school operating in Chicago?
In Chicago
and in Detroit.
And in Detroit.
And kids come to your school in lieu of going to what we would call regular day school?
Yes, sir, many.
What do you teach them there?
We teach them the same things that they would be taught ordinarily in school, minus the little black Sambo story and things that were taught to you and me when we were coming up to breathe that inferiority complex in us.
Do you teach them what you've just said to me, that the white man is a symbol of evil?
You can go to any little Muslim child and ask him where's hell or who is the devil, and he wouldn't tell you that hell is down in the ground or that the devil is something invisible that you can't see. He'll tell you hell is right where he has been catching it, and he'll tell you who the one who is responsible for him having received this hell is the devil.
And he would say that this devil is the white man?
Yes.
Can a white man join your temple?
None have ever joined.
If one came up and attempted to join, would he be allowed to come in and be taught?
No, sir.
Why not?
Well, that's one of the reasons why most people think that Mr. Muhammad teaches hate. But if there is a rattlesnake in the field who has been biting your brothers and your sisters, and you go and tell them that that's a rattlesnake, and all of the harm that has ever come to them has come to them from that particular source, well, then that rattler will think that the warner is teaching hate. He'll go back and tell the other snakes that this man is teaching hate, this man is teaching hate, but it's not hate. It's just that when you study people who have been harmed and discover the source of their injury, the source of all of their defects, and you begin to point out that source, it's not that you hate the source, but your love for your people is so intense, so great, that you must let them know what is wrong with them, what is the cause of their ills. And this is one of the basic factors, I believe, involved when people think, or when the propaganda is put out that Mr. Muhammad teaches hate. He teaches black people to love each other. And our love for each other is so strong, we don't have any room left in our heart.
I came away from that rally feeling that with him, once you heard him speak, you never went back to where you were before. You had to, even if you kept your position, you had to rethink it.
We weren't accustomed to being told that we were devils and that we were oppressors up here in our wonderful northern cities. He was speaking for a silent mass of black people and saying it out front on the devil's own airwaves. And that was an act of war.
When he came off the stage, I jumped off the island, walked up to him, and of course when I got to him, the bodyguards, moved in front, and he just pushed them away, and I went in front of him and extended my hand and said, I liked some of what you said. I didn't agree with all that you said, but I liked some of what you said. And he looked at me, held my hand in a very gentle fashion, and says, one day you will, sister. One day you will, sister. And he smiled.
One of the signs that manifest the wrath of God today against America and against the white world, period, is the upset in nature. Everything that America tries to do today, wherein once you were successful in all of your efforts, all of your endeavors were successful. Anything that Uncle Sam put his hand on turned to gold. Everyone bowed to Uncle Sam. Everyone respected Uncle Sam. But not because I say so, but for facts. Today, the shoe is on the other foot. The whole world is turning its back on Uncle Sam. The whole world is looking down on Uncle Sam. The whole world looks at Uncle Sam with contempt and with increasing hatred. Why? Because Uncle Sam is the earth's leading hypocrite. The number one hypocrite on this earth is Uncle Sam.
He sent a hate bus to meet him. This man then goes on to promise in the same interview that when he becomes president in 1972, he will put all Jews in the gas chamber. Now, my friends, I know Malcolm X. He is no fascist. I am merely pointing out that if you do not have an adequate program, and if you do not rely upon the progressive allies, you throw yourself open to being utilized by these people who have no interest in what we are doing. The Muslim movement basically fails to see the real problem. The problem can never be stated in terms of black and white. I am here to tell you, in a showdown, I will stand with Jim Peck sooner than I will stand with many Negroes I know. This democratization and socialization the Negro cannot do alone. He can contribute greatly toward it. He can contribute vastly toward it. And any movement which begins by blocking out the active cooperation of the best minds, many of which are white as well as black, as to the nature of the new society we need to have here, the process of socialization which we need to have here, is unrealistic and fighting a losing battle. For the Freedom Rides created a situation in which Kennedy then had to act through his brother, because to fail to do so would create so much confusion that something had to be done. The problem is, how do Negroes and their friends make the institutions which exist impossible to exist? The way in which the segregation was done away in the Woolworth and other stores in the South was by people sitting and saying, either you will have no places to eat, or they will be integrated. When we did that, they were integrated. Furthermore, I maintain that even if it were possible to bring any degree of progress now, it is going to be because as we follow this form of mass action and strategic nonviolence, we will not only put pressure on the government, but we will put pressure on other groups which ought by their nature to be allied with us. And they will have to stand up and be counted in their own interest.
Spokesman for white people. White people are too intelligent for that. Well, we today are waking up to, and there's no so-called Negro married to a white woman that can stand up and say that he speaks for the black masses. Maybe he can speak for the bourgeois, the bourgeoisie. But as Dr. Rustin pointed out, he doesn't speak for the black masses, and there are more poor black people in this country than there are rich black people. Please. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad says that if you try and keep us here against our will and enforce segregation upon us, you're going to have violence throughout the country. You're going to have it whether you like it or not. And when I say Kennedy, I mean John F. Kennedy. The man who promised all the American so-called Negroes who vote what he was going to do for them when he got in office, and has yet to do the first thing that he promised, but has paid off the Negro leadership so that they are silent and say nothing about the promises that he originally made to get Negroes to vote for him. Now, I would like to point out another point before we go any farther. We who are followers of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad do not make a choice between integration and segregation. Segregation doesn't enter into the picture at all. We are for separation, not segregation. Segregation, as we're taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, is that which is forced upon inferiors by superiors. Separation is done voluntarily by two equals. When you find an all-white school, they don't call it a segregated school, they call it a separate school. When you find an all-Negro school, they call it a segregated school, because it was set up by the white man. If it was an all-black school that had been set up by the black man himself, run by the black man himself, with the curricula that they follow, put in the school by the black man himself, they would call it a separate school. And it would be just as independent and on equal basis with the white school. People who are defenseless, who are harmless, and because of your indoctrination and brainwashing, brainless, senseless, have no intellect whatsoever of their own where they can think for themselves. And it is because America has taken millions of black people from the East, from their own culture, from their own civilization, and brought them here and stripped them and brought them down to the level of an animal, and then turned around and taught them that they were savages in the jungle, cannibals eating people. When they were caught and brought here, this is supposed to justify the American white man's treatment of these people. It's like taking a horse, putting him in a cage, tying him up, and putting another horse on the outside, and then tell everybody the horse that's in the cage can't run as fast as the one on the outside. And this is what you have done to the American Negro. You have brought us here and stripped us of everything we once had. You've stripped us of our culture, you've stripped us of our language, you've stripped us of our God, our religion, our background. You've cut off our roots, all ties that we once had with our own kind in the East. And after stripping us of our roots and destroying us as a people, making us become dead as a people, mentally and otherwise, then you point the finger of scorn at us and tell the world that we're not ready for freedom, that we're not qualified for freedom. All praise is due to Allah. And it is for this reason that God is bringing America to her knees. It is for this reason that God is going to judge America. It is for this reason that America is doomed, and it is for this reason that we who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad feel that our only hope is not integration with a doomed society, but complete separation from a doomed society. South Africa practices what it preaches. Russia practices what it preaches. Franco Spain practices what it preaches. It's a dictatorship. It doesn't preach freedom. South Africa doesn't preach freedom. Russia doesn't call itself the leader of the free world. It's America that looks upon herself and represents herself as the leader of the free world, while she has 20 million black people here who aren't even citizens. 20 million black people here. How can you and your government leaders stand up in the United Nations and point the finger at South Africa for practicing what it preaches? It preaches apartheid and it practices apartheid. It preaches the inferiority of the races and it practices the inferiority of the races. Whereas you preach one thing and practice another thing. You say that this is a land of equality and 20 million of your black citizens, so-called citizens, don't have equality. You say that this is the land of freedom and 20 million black people here don't have freedom. You say that this is the land of justice and 20 million black people here don't have justice. And the government, from the Supreme Court, the Senate and the Congress and the President on up or down, is not able in combined to bring about any change in the attitude of white America toward black America. God is God. He's the same God that the Hebrews worshiped, the same God that the Christians worship, and the same God that the Muslims worship. You call him Christ, they call him Jehovah, we call him Allah. Just as Jehovah was absent while the Hebrews were suffering under Pharaoh, didn't mean he was asleep. It meant that he had given Pharaoh an opportunity to rise to a powerful position economically, politically, militarily, so that he could become so powerful that the then unknown God would make himself known by destroying that powerful nation. And if you read your Bible, I think that you will agree that this is the case. God told Pharaoh, "It is for this cause that I raised you up. It is for this cause that I myself bless you and your nation to become as powerful as it is." You've become so powerful, now you think you're God. And you have my people in your clutches. So I will prove that I'm God by taking the ones that you look down upon and elevating them while I destroy you. And your only way to avoid that destruction is to submit to these same people whom you in the past have been making submit to you.
That he has not got it. It is also that the black Muslims have put forth, as you ought to know, no concrete program except speaking on 125th Street. Now, if I put the kneel-ins against merely speaking on the street, at least that's a program. Come up with a better one.
If white immigrants can come to this country 50 years ago with nickels and dimes and no education, and come here and pool their little nickels and dimes and no education, and set up little stores, develop these stores into larger stores, develop this into an industry which creates job opportunities for whites. Since Lincoln was supposed to have freed the black man 100 years ago, and today the black man, according to the government economist, has spending power of $20 billion per year. We feel that with the black man spending $20 billion a year, not setting up any businesses, not creating any industry, not creating any job opportunities for his own kind, he's not in a moral position to point the finger today at the white man and tell the white man that he's discriminating against him for not giving him a job in factories that he himself set up. If the black man has $20 billion, and these so-called Negro leaders are such geniuses that they can integrate white restaurants and integrate white factories and force themselves into that which the white man has set up, they should use this same ingenuity to show the black people how to pool our wealth and set up something of our own. And then we won't have to force our way into his anymore. One more thing I would like to point out concerning what he said about 125th Street. We don't waste our time on 125th Street, but you can reach more people in the street who want to change than you can in the bourgeoisie society, the bourgeoisie church, and the bourgeoisie circles. Our program is directed toward the man in the street. So we spend our time in the street, and what we do with that man, instead of trying to change the white man in your mind and make you accept us, we change the mind of the black man and make him accept himself. And as soon as he accepts himself, he'll solve his own problem. He won't be trying to force himself into your factory and into your bedroom and into your kitchen. Eisenhower, a couple months ago, referred to the situation that the West faces as Armageddon in a speech in Chicago before some distinguished Republicans, if there are such. And he referred to this crisis that America is facing as Armageddon because of the nuclear-tipped missiles that are poised all over the earth. If this destruction is ever turned loose on America, the Negro has no fallout shelters. And white people who have them, you won't even let Negroes in white neighborhoods during peacetime. How will he get in your fallout shelter during wartime? You haven't yet desegregated New Rochelle. How are you going to let Negroes, when you're under attack, into a space that you yourself hardly have room in? Why, you're crazy if you think we even think that you will. So we're not relying on fallout shelter. We're not relying on air raid shelter. As I said earlier, we're relying on God. When God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah with fire, and brimstone, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that that's only a symbolic story designed to paint a prophetic picture of what America is faced with today. Because of the immorality and indecency and corruption that exists, in all levels of American society, God has doomed America for destruction. The only salvation or escape is through God and with God. This is what we teach. And despite the fact that we tell you that we rely 100% upon our God to protect us against the trouble that you have gotten yourself in. You didn't get us in this. It's trouble that you have gotten yourself in. If you notice, whenever I refer to America, I don't say we. I don't say I or our. I say you. This is yours. It's not me or mine. And you'll find that this thinking is increasing among black people today. They don't say our government, our president, our Senate, our Congress, nor do they say our troubles. They say your president, your Congress, your Senate, and your troubles. We get closer to God, as Dr. Rustin said, by stripping ourselves.
Today, in our discussion of minority groups, we have with us two guests. One is Minister Malcolm El-Shabazz, one of the top leaders of the Nation of Islam, or the so-called black Muslims. And we also have Mr. Herman Blake, one of the teaching assistants in the course. We will discuss today some of the goals and some of the strategies of the Nation of Islam. And I wonder if Mr. Blake might start it off by asking Mr. Shabazz a question.
Minister Malcolm, the thing that I thought might be good for starting it off is to talk about one of the most pervasive beliefs in the general society about the Nation of Islam, and that is that it is an organization dedicated to the use of violent means to attain its goals. The question I have is, how true is this, and why do you think it persists in society?
Well, the Muslims who have accepted the religion of Islam and follow the religious guidance of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad have never bombed any churches, have never murdered any little girls, as was done in Birmingham, have never lynched anybody, have never at any time been guilty of initiating any aggressive acts of violence during the entire 33 years or more that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has been teaching us. The charge of violence against us actually stems from the guilt complex that exists in the conscious and subconscious minds of most white people in this country. They know that they've been violent in their brutality against Negroes, and they feel that someday the Negro is going to wake up and try and do unto them as they have done do unto the whites as the whites have done unto us. We aren't a violent group. We are taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to obey the law, to respect everyone who respects us. We're taught to display courtesy, to be polite. But we're also taught that at any time anyone in any way inflicts or seeks to inflict violence upon us, we are within our religious rights to retaliate in self-defense to the maximum degree of our ability. We never initiate any violence upon anyone, but if anyone attacks us, we reserve the right to defend ourselves. So to accuse us of being violent is like accusing a man who is being lynched, who is being hung on a tree, simply because he struggles vigorously against his lyncher. The victim is accused of violence, but the lyncher is never accused of violence. And I only point this out because the various racist groups that are set up in this country by whites and who have actually practiced violence against blacks for 400 years are never associated or identified or made synonymous with the term violence. But whites
speak of Muslims almost synonymously with violence. Whenever Muslims are mentioned by them, violence is brought up. But it's not connected with any other group. This is a sort of a propaganda tactic, or what I would call psychological warfare, to in some way make the image of the Muslims in this country be a violent image rather than a religious image.
I'd like to ask a question in that regard. What's interesting is that members of the Nation of Islam have not used violence even when black Americans were attacked. How do you account for this? Does this in any way contradict some of the basic premises of your movement?
I don't know how you mean.
Well, you maintain, for example, that you will not, or that you should not use violence unless you are attacked by the white man. And I think we can note in the last several years, certainly, dozens and dozens and dozens of instances in which Negroes have been attacked, killed in some instances.
You mean in these demonstrations?
The demonstrations and the bombings, for example, recently in Birmingham, where they killed 4 little Negro girls. And what interests me is the fact is that the Nation of Islam has not done anything to retaliate.
I think you should be happy.
The important thing is, does your lack of action contradict any of your basic principles?
I'll explain it. You should be happy that Muslims who follow the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, number one, don't believe in any form of integration, and believe that every mention of the word integration by whites, whether it be from the mouth of Kennedy on down to the mouth of the lowest, raggediest white liberal in the street who is beatnik-like involving himself in these integration efforts, if we believed in it, we would integrate, and we would fight anybody who got in our way or made any effort whatsoever to stop us from integrating. If we really believed that the law of the land, the Supreme Court, and other so-called judicial bodies were for real when they talked about integration, we would integrate. And knowing that the law was on our side, and any effort we made to demonstrate toward integration, why, we would know the law should be on our side, if it's the law of the land. If it is the law of the land, then the demonstrators are within the law, and the discriminators are against the law. But to show you the hypocrisy of the law, when Negroes demonstrate for integration, instead of arresting the discriminators, the law arrests the demonstrators. So this is a foolish move on the part of Negroes. And when you foolishly get yourself involved with an enemy, then whatever comes upon you, that's your business. As Muslims, we believe that separation is the best way and the only sensible way, not integration. And but on the other hand, when we see our people being brutalized by white bigots, white racists, we think that they are foolish to allow themselves to be beaten and brutalized and do nothing whatsoever to protect themselves. They are foolish. They should have the right to defend themselves against any attack made against them by anyone. If a dog is biting a black man, the black man should kill the dog. Whether the dog is a police dog, a hound dog, or any kind of dog. If a dog is sick on a black man, when that black man is doing nothing but trying to take advantage of what the government says is supposed to be his, then that black man should kill that dog, or any two-legged dog who sicks the dog on it.
Should other black men help that particular person who was attacked?
I think you'll find, sir, that there will come a time when black people wake up and become intellectually independent enough to think for themselves, as other humans are intellectually independent enough to think for themselves. Then the black man will think like a black man, and he will feel for other black people. And this new thinking and feeling will cause black people to stick together. And then at that point, you'll have a situation where when you attack one black man, you are attacking all black men. And this type of black thinking will cause all black people to stick together. And this type of thinking also will bring an end to the brutality inflicted upon black people by white people. And it is the only thing that will bring an end to it. No federal court, state court, or city court will bring an end to it. It's something that the black man has to bring an end to himself.
Minister Malcolm, let me, on the basis of your two remarks, ask a double-pronged question. One, is it then your assertion that the laws with respect to how Negroes are supposed to have equal opportunity and equal rights in this country are not meaningful or believed by whites? And secondly, what is your opinion and attitude toward the civil rights movement in general, and particularly the Reverend Martin Luther King and his philosophy of nonviolent direct action?
If the white people really passed meaningful laws, it would not be necessary to pass any more laws. There are already enough laws on the law books to protect an American citizen. You only need additional laws when you're dealing with someone who's not regarded as an American citizen. But whites are so hypocritical. They don't want to admit that this black man is not a citizen. So they classify him as a second-class citizen to get around making him a real citizen. If he was a real citizen, you'd need no more laws. You'd need no civil rights legislation. Civil rights, when you have civil rights, you have citizenship. It's automatic. White people don't need laws to protect their citizenship because they're citizens. But they don't want to tell us we're not citizens. And at the same time, they don't want to pass laws that are meaningful enough to protect us as if we were citizens. And the Supreme Court desegregation decision is the best example I know. That's a law from the Supreme Court. 10 years have gone by. No desegregated schools. It hasn't been implemented beyond, I think, 9% in 10 years. So this just shows you the hypocrisy of the American white man. They talk out of both sides of their mouth. And for this reason, we who are Muslims, that is, who believe in the religion of Islam, who believe in God, we don't believe that black people will ever get any laws, get any problem with laws being passed or new persons being put in office, white liberals being put in office. There is nothing that the white man will ever do to bring about true, sincere citizenship or civil rights recognition for black people in this country. Nothing will they ever do. They will always talk it, but they won't practice it. And with the Supreme Court, if the NAACP can tell me that they want a desegregation decision for me 10 years ago, but yet the schools haven't been desegregated, as I say, this is a victory with no victory. It's a victory that you can talk about, but it's a victory you can't show me. So if you represent the NAACP and you are telling me about this great victory you won for me, when I look at you, I have to conclude that either you have been duped yourself or else you are trying to dupe me. And in most instances where the civil rights struggle is involved, there is no civil rights leader can point to me one concrete gain, practical gain, that black people have made in the civil rights field in this country, not only during the past 10 years, but during the past 100 years.
Now, the other part was with respect to Mr. King and the nonviolent direct action.
Well, I will let Jimmy Baldwin and John Killens and Lou Lomax, the writers, answer that. Speaking right after this church was bombed in Birmingham, Christian church was bombed in Birmingham by Christians too, mind you, and these 4 little girls were murdered. John Killens and James Baldwin and Lomax and the Negro writers and actors had a meeting at the town hall in New York, and Killen pointed out concerning these murders of these little girls, said the killings had raised doubts about the intelligence of the nonviolence in the civil rights struggle. He went on to declare that he could no longer be asked to love those who persecuted and killed Negroes. He also, and the writer, Mr. Handler, who's describing this, said that Killens, it was not clear concerning Killens' remarks to his audience that he was breaking with it was clear rather to his audience that he was breaking with the doctrine of the Reverend Martin Luther King's philosophy that as Christians, Negroes should love their fellow man in a truly religious sense. Now, James Baldwin, speaking on that same platform, said, and I was present during this entire affair, asserted that the American people shared a collective guilt for the persecution of Negroes, much as Germans did because of their silence during the Nazi persecution. He denounced President Kennedy for what he termed Kennedy's lack of passion in the civil rights struggle. Mr. Baldwin said that there could no longer be a Republican Party for the Negro people as long as it listed a Barry Goldwater, nor a Democratic Party for the Negro people with a Senator Eastland on its roster. He asserted that the federal government acted swiftly and energetically, that unless the federal government acted swiftly and energetically, future slaughter would make Birmingham look like a dress rehearsal. And now, what do I think about King's attitude? King's right-hand man, Wyatt Walker, at King's convention, according to the New York Times on September the 26th, said, quote, "We have been duped," meaning these persons involved in the civil rights struggle, of which King is the symbolic leader. His right-hand man says, and I quote, "We have been duped, or have duped ourselves, into believing that the chains have been broken, when in truth we have only been chained more securely. Half freedom has in many instances been worse than no freedom at all." Why, don't ask me what I think about their struggle. I can tell you what they think about their struggle. And they are pointing out that it is becoming more difficult every day for the civil rights leaders to keep the masses of black people nonviolent and long-suffering and patient, and keep them from becoming disenchanted. I hope that answers your question.
Well, now there's a new party which has started on the East Coast called the Freedom Now Party, an all-black organization. Would you comment upon this and also upon the possibility that the Nation of Islam might begin to turn some of its attention to the political arena in view of the fact that it is in the political arena that Negroes have not been able to in any way get justice, as has been pointed out in your previous statement?
I'm not familiar with the Freedom Now Party. I'm not too familiar with politics, period, only that in the sense that white politicians have usually been very hypocritical where the so-called Negroes are concerned. So I'm a bit disenchanted with politicians and politics. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad is a religious man, and his teaching is religious and his solutions are religious. The Freedom Now Party, from what I understand, is headed by a lawyer named Conrad Lynn. I know him, he probably means well. Before passing an opinion on what it is he's trying to do, I would like to analyze it and see who's subsidizing him, see who his friends are, especially who his white friends are. And after a careful analysis, if I could conclude that there was no white support, I would be inclined to have confidence in it. But if I saw him leaning too heavily upon his white liberal friends for support, then I'd be suspicious of that too. The Muslims, in my opinion, represent an all-black party. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad pointed out at before 10,000 in Philadelphia on September the 29th at a rally that we were having, that in 1964 the black people should band together and do something about selecting and electing representatives, black representatives, politically, who have the rights and the best interests of the black people at heart, and that we should also unite together and sweep out of office all of the black political puppets who are used by the white power structure to continue white supremacy in our communities.
In that regard, would you include Congressman Dawson, for example, from Chicago, and some of the people who represent him on the Chicago City Council?
In which regard?
In the area of acting as a puppet.
I don't know what Mr. Muhammad's opinion is of Congressman Dawson. They both live right there in the city of Chicago together. I don't know what his opinion is of Congressman Dawson. I'm suspicious of any Negro, be he politician, be he clergyman, or civic leader who is constantly patted on the back by whites. I have a tendency to lead toward the Negro politician who is constantly condemned by the white power structure. This is my thought pattern. I'm giving you an insight of it.
You, though, mentioned Mr. Lynn and saying you'd like to know who his white friends are. Now, I'm wondering if you didn't make a contradictory statement in Muslim terms by using white and friend in the same phrase. That is
I
to
use
say,
friend in quotes.
I see. In other words, if a black man cannot have a white man as a friend.
He may have a white man who's friendly, but being friendly and being a friend, I think, are two different things. I think there are many whites who act friendly toward Negroes. A fox acts friendly toward the lamb. And usually the fox is the one who ends up with the lamb chop on his plate. The wolf doesn't act friendly, and therefore the wolf has more difficulty in getting the lamb chop in his plate.
I'd like to point out, though, that...
And I say that because it is usually if you study the structure of the Negro community, economically, politically, civically, psychologically, and otherwise, it's controlled by the white liberal, who usually poses as the friend of the Negro, who actually differs from the white conservative in the same way that the fox differs from the wolf. Their appetite is the same. Their motives are the same. It's only their mannerisms and methods that differ.
I would agree that no doubt there have been a large number of whites who have posed as liberals and as friends of the Negro and who have time and again betrayed the Negro. On the other hand, I think one could point to a large number of whites who have struggled for civil rights, for equality, and have got little or nothing out of it, other than quite a few bruises.
Give me an example.
Well, the large number of white students who have gone into the South, for example, working for SNCC and other organizations.
Not working for SNCC or other organizations, but working for the white political machines who benefit by the voting efforts of Negroes.
Okay, I'll be more specific. I would cite Herbert Hill, for example, as a kind of person who has championed Negro job rights, for example, in New York City and elsewhere. He has fought the political machine.
First time I met Herbert Hill personally was when they were picketing to stop the working on the Harlem Hospital in Harlem. Negroes for 10 years had to fight the city to get an annex built on the Harlem Hospital. Because in Harlem we need a hospital more so than anything else. Our people are sick. Plus we do a lot of cutting and shooting of each other, though we profess to be nonviolent. And Herbert Hill brought his forces out and stopped the working on that site. This is the first time I ever saw him. Then when work was brought to a halt on a hospital in Harlem, the same Negroes tried to stop the work at the Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn, which is predominantly white. They were out there for 3 months during the summer. Couldn't stop anything. And I never saw Herbert Hill out there one time. Now, whenever it takes a stoppage of something that's going to affect the white man, you find the white liberal absent. But when it involves something that primarily will affect the best interests of black people and black people only, then that white liberal is present. Herbert Hill is the labor secretary for the NAACP. And if he was interested in black people, he would prepare a black man with the type of knowledge and understanding of the labor troubles involving black people that would enable a black man to sit in the same position as Secretary of Labor or Labor Secretary in the NAACP. I'm suspicious of whites who join Negroes and always have to be in the lead, who always have to be the head, who always have to be at the top in Negro organizations. Those whites who really have the interest of blacks at heart, let them give some advice to some Negroes and stand on the sideline. But don't join the organization and then get at the head of it and pose as a friend of Negroes.
Well, I would defend his sincerity and his commitment. And more than that, I would say that just because a person is a Negro or a black American does not mean that he's going to struggle for Negro rights or for jobs for Negroes or anything else. I think that today, you could point to a large number of Negro leaders who have consistently betrayed Negroes in a whole host of areas.
They aren't really Negro leaders. These are puppets that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. These are parrots that have been put in front of the Negro community by white liberals. You can't name me a Negro leader who has betrayed Negroes, who has not been endorsed, sanctioned, subsidized, and supported by the white liberals.
Minister Malcolm, I'd like to...
Well, I could cite one example would be Congressman Dawson, for example, in Chicago. In Chicago, a large number of liberals located in the Hyde Park district have consistently fought Dawson and his betrayals of the Negro, and they've also fought some of the people who represent Dawson on the Chicago City Council.
The only Negro I know who is constantly fought, only Negro politician that I know who is constantly fought by white liberals is Adam Clayton Powell. And they call him a racist because he speaks so bluntly on the race issue. But I'm not, as I said, not too familiar with Dawson and his work.
Let me return to the Nation of Islam per se, Minister, by raising a question which struck me as a result of reading some of Baldwin's work, namely The Fire Next Time. Baldwin pointed out that in Harlem for many years he had passed the street corners and the soapboxes and heard people speaking from these platforms who were known as black nationalists, and nobody was listening. And he said all of a sudden he realized that people were beginning to listen to the Muslim speakers on the street corners in Harlem. The message essentially was the same, but it was that now many people were listening to what this message was. And you pointed out that the Nation of Islam has been in the picture for about 33 years. What is it, in your judgment, that has caused this tremendous amount of support that the Nation of Islam has garnered in the Negro community in, say, the last 10 years?
One situation that is making black people in America more receptive, their mind more fertile to the seed of truth that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has been planting for 30-some years. And this is springing up today and causing our people to see and understand now what they couldn't see and understand before.
What is the nature of this situation which is making black people more receptive?
Well, you take in the past, say, 15 years, how the nations have emerged, dark nations have emerged in Africa. Prior to 10 years ago, most Negroes identified Africa with a savage, jungle-like place. And whenever you mentioned the word African, in their mind's eye, they could see the image of someone running around with a spear, with no language, who'd say Ugga Bugga Boo or Bwana or something, and who'd be in a jungle running from lions or chasing lions. But then when, after the war, when the United Nations was set up in New York City, black people began to look at men like Tom Mboya. They began to look at men like Nkrumah. They began to see men like Lumumba. They began to see men like Nasser. They began to see these Belawa and Azikwe, who could exchange intellectually with whites on an international level in a political form and hold their own. This made the black people in this country realize that what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad had been teaching all the time actually had substance. And they began to turn it over in their mind and see that what he was saying had more weight to it than what these other Negroes were saying. And they began to identify themselves with the black world and the black struggle more closely than they identified themselves with this so-called white world.
Let me ask you a question with respect to a statement which Essien Udom quotes as being on a bulletin board in the University of Islam in Chicago by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. According to Essien, Mr. Muhammad states, "Up, you mighty race. You can accomplish what you willed. Build your future on these foundations: freedom, justice, and equality." What is the definition of freedom, justice, and equality for the black man, and where and when is it to be attained?
Well, take equality first. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad doesn't teach us to associate equality with whites. Equality has nothing to do with whites. We don't want to be equal with the white man. He's not the criteria or yardstick by which equality is measured. He's not in a position to tell us we are equal. It's not his right. It's not his to do. Equality, we want equality. We had equality before the white man was created. We had equality before the white man came into existence. And we want equality whether the white man is on this earth or not. Equality means the opportunity to develop all of our dormant potential, all of our dormant capability. And in developing this dormant capability, the right and the ability to stand on this earth on some land of our own and bring about a civilization and a society in which we will be completely independent, complete freedom to take care of the needs, to take care of the wants and the likes and the dislikes of our people, to establish our own nation, our own society, our own heaven, our own future. This is what we mean by freedom, by equality. And justice means as you sow, so shall you reap. If you do wrong, you'll get wrong in return. And if you do right, you'll get right in return. When you're in your own nation, in your own land, you're in a position to get justice. But when you're in another man's country, in another man's land, under another man's flag, and under another man's government, and under another man's court system, you have to look to that other man for justice, and you'll never get it. And Negroes in this country probably are authorities on that.
Yeah. To what extent does this formulation approach that expounded by Zionists? They, for example, many Zionists maintain they could never expect justice in the Tsarist courts and the courts found in other countries in Eastern Europe and so on. And they decided that it would be wise to establish a separate state in Israel.
And all of the world powers got together, the white world powers, I should say, got together and helped all of these white Jews to establish a separate state in the heart of a dark-skinned people's territory. And if white people can get together and let other whites, help other whites to establish an independent nation right in the midst of dark-skinned people, and then we don't see where white people should be so much against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's solution, not of setting up an independent dark nation in a white people's property, but he's asking the opportunity to set up an independent nation on our own continent. Let us leave America and go back home among our own people on our own land and set up our own independent society. But all he says is that this government, which made us slaves, should supply the transportation for us to get back home and give us all of the machinery and the tools necessary for us to till the soil and establish our own agricultural system to feed and clothe our people, our own economy, and in some way become an independent people among our own people on our own continent. This is intelligent. And Zionists should never criticize us.
You say then that the United States is not the black man's country.
Definitely
American laws are not black men's laws.
No.
American laws are not the black man's laws.
Well, the laws here in America were made by white people for the benefit of white people. The Constitution was written by whites for the benefit of whites. It was never written for the benefit of blacks. And when you read the Constitution, I think in Article 1, Section 2, or Section 1, Article 1, one of the two, and it's in the Constitution, it says that it classifies black people as 3/5 of a man. 3/5 of a man, subhuman, less than a human being. It relegates us to the level of cattle, hogs, chickens, cows, a commodity that could be bought and sold at the will of the master. No, it was written by whites for the benefit of whites and to the detriment of blacks. And when a black man stands up talking about his constitutional rights, he's out of his mind.
Now, Minister Malcolm, in our textbook, which the students have read, supposedly, there is a statement, which is a quotation from Essien and essentially that from Lincoln, to the effect that the Nation of Islam does not have a great deal of support in the Negro community in this country by and large. And a recent national poll of American Negroes found that leaders and rank and file, according to their statistics, supported the Reverend Martin Luther King somewhere over 90%, whereas the support and favorable rating that they gave Minister Muhammad was less than 20%, and somewhere around 45% of them gave an unfavorable rating to Mr. Muhammad. What would your response be in terms of Baldwin's statement that this is a growing thing and the kinds of evidence that we have that there isn't much to it?
Well, that statement I just made concerning the Constitution is Article 1, Section 2 in the Constitution, where it classifies us as chattel. Baldwin did point out that Mr. Muhammad has the only grassroots support and is the only one whose whole following operates or functions on a mass vehicle. And I think Baldwin told Dr. Kenneth Clark that Martin Luther King is at the end of his rope. Now, concerning the poll taken by Newsweek magazine, I think you said that this was the leaders who said that, who went with King and against Mr. Muhammad around 90%. I just told you a little while ago, these leaders that they call leaders, this included Lena Horne, this included Dick Gregory, and this included comedians, comics, trumpet players, baseball players. Show me in the white community where a comedian is a white leader. Show me in the white community where a singer is a white leader, or a dancer or a trumpet player is a white leader. These aren't leaders. These are puppets and clowns that have been set up over the white community and over the black community by the white community and have been made celebrities and usually say exactly what they know that the white man wants to hear. And it is an honor, actually, that they endorsed Dr. Martin Luther King and were against the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. That's actually an honor. Now, when you say that they also, in this same Newsweek poll magazine, I think the pollster said that he went into the Negro community and asked about the Muslims. And many Negroes whom he asked said, well, I never heard of the Muslims. Who are they? You know,
this is the rank and file we're talking about.
Oh, yeah. Now, when they got down to the rank and file, this was the answers that they got. This is equivalent to the situation in Kenya during the Mau Mau uprising, when many frightened whites in Kenya, Africa, would go among the Africans and ask them, what about the Mau Mau? And the African would say, I never heard of them. And the same white man who would ask the African this question and very naively believe what the African said, when he went to bed that night, he would lose his head. And usually the one who took his head was the same African who told him that afternoon he had never heard of the Mau Mau.
Except in the Newsweek poll, they used Negro interviewers.
You'll find that oftentimes Negroes are as much on guard around Negro interviewers, who usually represent the bourgeois element of Negroes, as they are on guard around whites. Usually Negroes know that when this bourgeois Negro walks through the door, he is not doing something that he's initiated himself, but he's involved in something in which the white man is the absolute author of and has sent him to the Negro community for some information. And when they give that Negro some information, usually they give him the information that they want him to take back to the white man, because that's who he's going to take it back to.
4 more minutes.
Our time is just about up, Minister Malcolm, and perhaps you could summarize and conclude by giving us, in your opinion or in the opinion of Mr. Elijah Muhammad, what would be the ideal solution to the racial problem in the United States today?
Well, on Thursday, October the 3rd, the New York Tribune, in an editorial, pointed out in Boston, in an article called The Civil Rights Iceberg, they pointed out how Kennedy had realized that beneath the water, the civil rights whole problem was political suicide. Because in his own hometown, the head of the Board of Education, a woman named Mrs. Hicks, was running against the NAACP philosophy, and she swept aside all other opposition. The whole white community supported her in opposition to the NAACP's desire for integrated schools, integrated housing, and otherwise. So I say that to say this, that even the Jewish community, which is supposed to be pro-liberal, went against the NAACP. Whites are against integration in practice, but they're for it in principle. So the only solution is separation. And the Honorable Elijah Muhammad says that this can be brought about simply by letting our people be exposed to the truth about ourselves, about the white man, about our history and our condition in this country. And once we are exposed to the complete truth about things as they actually exist in this country, the masses of black people will choose complete separation from this entire system, political system, economic system, social system, and whatever other aspect or description or adjective you want to attach to it. Let us go back home to our own people, live among our own kind, and solve our own problems ourselves. And if the white man doesn't want us to go back to our own people and live in our own country, then since we can't get along together in peace on this country with white people, Let us separate part of this continent, migrate to that separate territory. Let the government give us everything we need to establish our own independent economic system and society, and thereby we'll be able to solve our own problems ourselves and prove that we are human beings and a part of the human family and can do for ourselves what other humans have done for themselves. And then we'll be able to stop blaming the white man for what he has done and stop begging the white man to solve our problems. We'll be able to solve our problems ourselves.
Thank you very much. That's it.
He would excite women, you know, in his, you know, presentations. You know, some would even have orgasms right in the audience, but that they could see, you know, I mean, you know, right? And I guess Malcolm could see that too. That's the kind of charisma that he had, all right?
In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, to whom all praise is due, whom we forever thank for giving us the Honorable Elijah Muhammad as our leader, teacher, and guide. And I specifically, ladies and gentlemen, and brothers and sisters, open up like that because I am a representative of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. And were it not for him, you and I wouldn't be here today. In order for you and me to devise some kind of method or strategy to offset some of the events or a repetition of the events that have taken place here in Los Angeles recently, we have to go to the root. We have to go to the cause. Dealing with the condition itself is not enough. We have to get to the cause of it all, or the root of it all. And it is because of our effort toward getting straight to the root that people oftentimes think we're dealing in hate. But first, I would like to congratulate and give praise to the Negro, so-called Negro leaders and so-called Negro organizations. And excuse me if I say so-called, it's hard for me to just outright say Negro when I know what that word Negro really means. The person whom you have come to know as Ronald Stokes, we know him as Brother Ronald. One of the most religious persons who displayed the highest form of morals of any black person anywhere on this earth. And as one of the previous speakers pointed out who knew him, everyone who knew him had to give him credit for being a good man, a clean man, an intelligent man, and an innocent man when he was murdered. The Negro, so-called Negro organizations and leaders should be given great credit for their failure or refusal to let the white man divide them and use them one against the other during this crisis. As Reverend Wilfred Wilson pointed out, I think it was 8 years ago today that the Supreme Court handed down the desegregation decision. And despite the fact that 8 years have gone past, that decision hasn't been implemented yet. I don't have that much faith. I don't have that much confidence. I don't have that much patience. And I don't have that much ignorance to... If the Supreme Court, which is the highest law-making body in the country, can pass a decision that can't get even 8% compliance with in 8 years because it's for black people, then my patience has run out.
When black people who are being oppressed become impatient, they say that's emotional. Please. When black people who are being deprived of their citizenship, not only of their civil rights, but their human rights, become impatient, become fed up, don't want to wait any longer, then they say that's emotional. The Negro, so-called Negro leaders and organizations should be praised. They should be congratulated. They should be complimented. Because out of all of them combined, the white man has not yet found one who will play the role of Uncle Tom. But yet he has found no Tom, no puppet, no parrot who is still dumb enough in 1962 to represent the injustices that he's afflicting against our people. We don't care what your religion is. We don't care what organization you belong to. We don't care how far in school you went or didn't go. We don't care what kind of job you have. We have to give you credit for shocking the white man by not letting him divide you and use you one against the other. In the past, the greatest weapon the white man has had has been his ability to divide and conquer. As Jackie Robinson pointed out beautifully on the television last night, 4/5 of the world isn't white. Isn't that what Jackie said? And if 4/5 of the world is dark, how is it possible for 1/5 to rule, oppress, exploit, dominate, and brutalize the 4/5 who are in the majority? That's right. How do they do it? Divide and conquer. If I take my hand and slap you, you don't even feel it. It might sting you because these digits are separated. But all I have to do to put you back in your place is bring those digits together. This is what the white man has done to you and me. He has divided us and used us one against the other. But today, thanks to Allah, you can say thanks to God or thanks to Jesus or thanks to Jehovah, whatever you want. But as a follower of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, we have been taught to say thanks to Allah. And that's what Jesus said. Jesus called on Allah. He said, Allah, Allah, lama asabaqtani. I believe what's good for Jesus is good for you. If Allah was good enough for Jesus to call upon, I think he should be good enough for you to call upon. Since the so-called Negro community has shocked the white man by resisting all efforts to divide us, I think that you and I should continue to shock him by staying and working together in unity. Despite religious, political, economic, or educational or social differences, let us remember that we are not brutalized because we're Baptists. We're not brutalized because we're Methodists. We're not brutalized because we're Muslims. We're not brutalized because we're Catholics. We're brutalized because we are black people in America. Here your mother is being raped and you're not supposed to be emotional. Your women, please, your women can't walk the street without some cracker putting his hands on her, then you're not supposed to be emotional.
If you say that you're fed up, if you teach the Negro, people don't even know their own name. Why? Because he took it away from them. Please. 20 million black people don't even know their own language. Why? Because he took it away from them. 20 million black people who don't even know the history of their ancestors. Why? Because he took it away from them. And if you try and tell them how thoroughly and completely they've been robbed, he says you're teaching hate. That's something to think about. Today you are coming out of college. You're coming out of the leading universities. You're trying to go in a good direction, but you don't know which direction to go in. And if somebody tries to take you right to the root of your problem, they say that that man's a hate teacher. If I ask why should the senators in Washington, and then again if we tell you that Negroes are being hung on the tree or being shot down illegally, unjustly, and those Negroes should do something to protect themselves, you say you're advocating violence. The white man is tricking you. He's trapping you. He doesn't call it violence when he lands troops in South Vietnam. Please. He doesn't call it violence when he lands troops in Berlin. When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, he didn't say get nonviolent. He said, praise the Lord, but pass the ammunition. But when someone attacks you, when someone comes at you with a club, when someone comes at you with a rope, when someone comes at you with a gun, despite the fact that you've done nothing, he tells you, suffer peacefully. Pray for those who use you despitefully. Be long-suffering. And how long can you suffer after suffering for 400 years? So I just want to clear up that little point right there, because he says that we play on your emotions. And when you turn on your television tonight, or your radio, or read the newspaper, they're going to tell you in that paper that I was playing on your emotions. Imagine you, a second-class citizen. That's not getting emotional, it's getting intelligent. And as far as your mayor is concerned, I see you should say their mayor. A man named Yorty, who has been slandering the Muslims, a professional liar, who has mastered the art of using half-truths. Put it in the paper that they broke into our religious place of worship and got records that they can use to prove that most of us have criminal records. You can't be a Negro in America and not have a criminal record. Martin Luther King has been to jail. Clean. James Farmer has been to jail. Why, you can't name a black man in this country who is sick and tired of the hell that he's catching who hasn't been to jail. Charged him with being seditious. They put Moses in jail. They put Daniel in jail. Why, you haven't got a man of God in the Bible that wasn't put to jail when they started speaking out against exploitation and oppression. They charged Jesus with sedition. Didn't they do that? They said he was against Caesar. They said he was discriminating because he told his disciples, go not the way of the Gentiles, but rather go to the lost sheep. He discriminated. Don't go near the Gentiles, go to the lost sheep. Go to the oppressed. Go to the downtrodden. Go to the exploited. Go to the people who don't know who they are, who are lost from the knowledge of themselves, and who are strangers in a land that is not theirs. Go to those people. Go to the slaves. Go to the second-class citizens. Go to the ones who are suffering the brunt of Caesar's brutality. And if Jesus were here in America today, he wouldn't be going to the white man. The white man is the oppressor. He would be going to the oppressed. He would be going to the humble. He would be going to the lowly. He would be going to the rejected and the despised. He would be going to the so-called American Negro. To have once been a criminal is no disgrace. To remain a criminal is the disgrace. I formerly was a criminal. I formerly was in prison. I'm not ashamed of that. You never can use that over my head. And that he's using the wrong stick. I don't feel that stick. I went to prison because I believed in men like Sam Yorty. I went to prison because I trusted men like Sam Yorty. I went to prison following the philosophy of men like Sam Yorty. But since I've been following the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I have been reformed, and that's more, please. That's more than Sam Yorty and Chief Parker and all these other white politicians have been able to do with the inmates in the prisons of this state. They should give Mr. Muhammad credit. They should give Mr. Muhammad credit for reforming and rehabilitating men whom they have failed to reform and rehabilitate. Mayor Yorty referred to some press report that Mr. Muhammad had once been found guilty of contributing to the delinquency of a minor. He failed to explain purposely that in 1934, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad refused to send his children to the white schools in Detroit, Michigan that were teaching you about little black Sambo. That's the minor that he contributed to the delinquency of. You see, this vicious, fork-tongued white man has been able to take lies and make you turn against those who want to help you and make others turn against you. This is the contributing to the delinquency of a minor that this mayor, or man who calls himself mayor, is talking about. In the same article, he said that the Muslims are the same people who rioted in the United Nations. Someone should pull his coat and let him know that at the present moment, there are $6 million worth of suits leveled against two of New York's leading newspapers for making the mistake of charging the Muslims as being involved in those United Nations riots. We were not involved. And if this fork-tongued man who calls himself your mayor had taken the time to find that out, he wouldn't be walking into the trap that he's letting his ignorance lead him into. And if you would take the time to read the Washington Post that came out the Sunday after that incident took place, the Washington Post pointed out on the front page that the Muslims had nothing to do with the UN riots. And they quoted, in saying so, the person who was at that time the commissioner of police in New York City. See, it's lies that the white man has spread about the Muslims to try and make you afraid of the Muslims, or to try and make you think that the Muslims were a criminal element, an uncouth element, and things that you would not like to be associated with. Also, they say that I'm just clearing these things up, and then we're going to get into what happened. They also say that the Honorable Elijah Muhammad was a draft dodger. No, he wasn't. He just refused to go to the army because he was a man of peace. He was a minister of a religion of peace. He was teaching peace. So he outright refused to go to the army. That's not draft dodging. That's intelligence. Appear before the grand jury. because the coroner's jury is stacked against Negroes. The grand jury is stacked against Negroes. The press, the radio, the television, and the newspapers are stacked against Negroes. But please, the Los Angeles Police Department is stacked against Negroes. He is stacked against all Negroes, all except those whom he has appointed to high positions. The controlled press, the white press, inflames the white public against Negroes. The police are able to use it to paint the Negro community as a criminal element. The police are able to use the press to make the white public think that 90% or 99% of the Negroes in the Negro community are criminals. And once the white public is convinced that most of the Negro community is a criminal element, then this automatically paves the way for the police to move into the Negro community, exercising Gestapo tactics, stopping any black man who is on the sidewalk, whether he is guilty or whether he is innocent, whether he is well dressed or whether he is poorly dressed, whether he is educated or whether he is dumb, whether he's a Christian or whether he's a Muslim. As long as he is black and a member of the Negro community, the white public thinks that the white policeman is justified in going in there and trampling on that man's civil rights and on that man's human rights. Once the police have convinced the white public that the so-called Negro community is a criminal element, they can go in and question, brutalize, murder unarmed, innocent Negroes, and the white public is gullible enough to back them up. This makes the Negro community a police state. This makes the Negro neighborhood a police state. It's the most heavily patrolled. It has more police in it than any other neighborhood, yet it has more crime in it than any other neighborhood. How can you have more cops and more crime? Why? It shows you that the cops must be in cahoots with the criminals. The texture of the hair that God pleased, that God gave them, so much that they'll put lye on it. Do you realize now, you know, brother, lye will eat a hole in steel, and you know your head is not that hard. Who taught you, please, who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the color of your skin to such extent that you bleach to get like the white man? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself who taught you to hate being what God gave you. We teach you to love the hair that God gave you. Here you way out in the middle of the ocean, can't swim, and you worried about someone that's in the bathtub and can't swim. We don't steal, we don't gamble, we don't lie, and we don't cheat. And that also deprives the government of revenue. Because you can't get into a whiskey bottle without getting past the government seal. You can't open a deck of cards without getting past the government seal. There's a white man makes the whiskey and then puts you in jail for getting drunk. He sells you the cards and the dice and puts you in jail when he catches you using them. So he's against us because we fix it where he can't catch you anymore. We take the dice out of your hands and the cards out of your hands and the whiskey out of your head. The most disrespected person in America is the black woman. The most unprotected person in America is the black woman. The most neglected person in America is the black woman. And as Muslims, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us to respect our women and to protect our women. And then the only time a Muslim really gets real violent is when someone goes to molest his woman. We will kill you for our woman. I'm making it plain, yes. We will kill you for our woman. We believe that if the white man will do whatever is necessary to see that his woman gets respect and protection, then you and I will never be recognized as men until we stand up like men and place the same penalty over the head of anyone who puts his filthy hands out to put in the direction of our women. We respect them, but we want them to respect us. We think that the law should respect the Negro community. The law should protect the Negro community. The law should approach the Negro community with intelligence if it expects the Negro community to react intelligently. So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us to always avoid anything that smacks of disrespect for the law. And if the police department tells the truth, they will have to admit that they have never had any experiences with Muslims that have ever been anything other than honorable unless they themselves come at us in a dishonorable way. It has no case against the Muslims. It has no case against these brothers whom they shot down. And because it has no case, it's trying to create a case. It's trying to manufacture a case. And therefore they set up a grand jury hearing of the case so that they could hear it behind closed doors, and after hearing what we have to say, then build their particular strategy or defense against the actions that they committed on that April the 27th. So at the advice of our attorneys, we purposely, the victims, those who have been indicted, or rather those who have been arrested and are out on bond, have purposely refrained and refused from making any statement whatsoever until after the case appears in court. And when you hear their story, it will be in a public trial. We have already had experience with these private hearings behind closed doors. Anything that the white man has to do to the Muslim, he has to do it in the open. He has to do it in public, or he has to put every single one of us behind bars for the rest of our lives. When Mayor Yorty called for a government investigation of a religious group that has the highest moral standard of any group in the Negro community, Mayor Yorty was giving you an example of what Hitler did in Nazi Germany when he began to go on the rampage. We have confidence that the white public and the black public, if they hear our case, if they hear and have access to the investigation, will never be fooled by this phony setup that's stacked from the top all the way down. And if you doubt it, when you leave home tonight, when you go home tonight, look for the press. I'd like at this time to call forth these brothers who are who were arrested. The brothers who were arrested. Come up here behind these chairs, please. They were suspects. This wouldn't happen in a white neighborhood. White man can walk down the street with packages on his head, packages under his arm, and packages everywhere else, and won't anybody question his right to carry those packages. But a Negro is suspect because the press makes you suspect. Yes, the white press makes Negro suspect. What do you got? All the information you need, officer. And the officer made one stay at the rear of the car and the other go to the front of the car. And while he was taking the one to the front of the car, the polite attitude, the humble air, the submissive, intelligent, peaceful spirit that he unexpectedly found in this Negro infuriated him. And he began to, he told the brother, put down your hands. Brother was talking, he's not a criminal. A man has a right on the sidewalk to talk with his hands. Put down your hand, don't talk with your hands. And when the brother continued to gesture with his hands, the officer grabbed his hand, twisted it around behind his back, flung him up against the car, and then that's when hell broke loose. That was when hell broke loose. A struggle ensued. Shots were fired by the police and by a Negro door shaker. An alarm went out. When the alarm went out, instead of the police going to the place where the incident occurred, the police went 1 block away to the temple. When they arrived there, they got out of their cars with their guns smoking. You would have thought it was Wyatt, what his name? Wyatt Earp. I'm telling you, they came out of those cars, and we have enough witnesses to hang them with their guns smoking. Chief Parker knows this, Mayor Yorty knows this, and every police official in the city knows that. They didn't fire no warning shots in the air. They fired warning shots point blank at innocent, unarmed, defenseless Negroes. As I say, 2 of the brothers were shot in the back. Another was shot in the shoulder. Another was shot, 2 of them were shot, excuse the expression, through the penis. Another was shot in the hip, and the bullet came out the other side. Brother Arthur here was shot 1/4 of an inch from his heart. Let me tell you something, and I'll tell you why you say we hate white people. We don't hate anybody. We love our own people so much they think we hate the ones who are inflicting injustice against them. Man who has been shot, the bullet having passed 1/4 of an inch through his heart. I'm not going to let him talk, which I think you can understand why. You should listen to the conversation of the police officers while it was going on. 2 of the brothers who had been shot were lying hand in hand. The officer said they were chanting a death chant. You read that? They were saying, Allahu Akbar. What does that mean? It means that God is the greatest. It means that God is the greatest. Understand, this that the white officer called a death chant was a prayer. They were praying when they were shot down. They were saying Allahu Akbar. And it shook the officer up because they haven't heard black people talk any kind of talk but what they taught them. And two of the brothers who were shot in the back were telling me that as they lay on the sidewalk, they were holding hands. They held hands with each other, saying Allahu Akbar. And the blood was seeping out of them where the police bullets had torn into their insides. Still they said Allahu Akbar. And the police came and kicked them in the head. Police kicked them in the head, telling them to shut up that noise, while they were laying on the sidewalk in front of our temple. Kicked them in the head. Shut up that noise. And one of them, when he was on his way to the police station in the ambulance, one of the ambulance attendants told the white cop, "Why don't you kill the nigger?" He said, I'll tell him that he tried to get away. Why don't you kill the nigger while you got a chance? And I'll swear that he tried to get away. If he didn't say this, then I need to be put in jail, and I'll gladly go. One of them who was being taken to jail in a police car. As the ambulance sirens were coming to the place, one of the policemen said to the other, "What are the ambulances rushing for?" "Nothing but some niggers." So he looked in and saw the Muslim brother sitting beside him, and he said, and he shut up. But after he got to the jail, the same officer that said this turned to the brother and said, "I hope that you didn't get offended by what I said back there under the heat of emotion, because some of my best friends are colored." This is what he said. That's his password. Some of my best friends are colored. And I, for one, as a Muslim, believe that the white man is intelligent enough. If he were made to realize how black people really feel and how fed up we are without that old compromise and sweet talk, why, you're the one that make it hard for yourself. The white man believes you when you go to him with that old sweet talk, because you've been sweet talking him ever since he brought you here. Stop sweet talking him. Tell him how you feel. Tell him what kind of hell you've been catching, and let him know that if he's not ready to clean his house up, if he's not ready to clean his house up, he shouldn't have a house. It should catch on fire and burn down. Muslims, we identify ourselves with the dark world. So we're not any minority. We're a part of the majority, and the white man is the minority. You have to know this to understand us. We don't think any odds are against us. We don't fight a battle like the odds are against us. Why, the whole dark world today is in unity. It's one. If you don't think so, look at the United Nations. When the dark world votes, they vote as one. They get the colonialists out of Africa and out of Asia, telling them to get out. They don't have any nuclear weapons, but they got a solid, united voice, and their unity alone is sufficient to drive the oppressor and exploiter of their people out of their own country. You and I need to learn a lesson from that right there. In the UN, the dark world consists of Buddhists, Hindus, Shintoists, Taoists, Christians, Muslims, everything. But they're together. They forget their religious and political differences. They think as one. They move as one against a common enemy. And out of Algeria, he's going. Don't think he's not going. He's going. They're getting him out of Angola, out of Tanganyika, out of Angola, out of Uganda, out of Kenya. He's going from South Africa too. He hasn't got long to be there. All over this earth, dark people who have been oppressed and exploited by those who are not their own kind, strangers, are coming together to get the oppressor off their back. You and I learn a lesson from that. We are oppressed. We are exploited. We are downtrodden. We are denied not only civil rights, but even human rights. So the only way we're going to get some of this oppression and exploitation away from us or aside from us is come together against the common enemy. When they sat down at the Bandung Conference, everyone there had this in common: a dark skin. Some of those who were sitting there were socialists, some were communists, some were capitalists, some were Christians, some were Buddhists. They were everything. But all of them was dark skin. And they looked at that dark skin and agreed that this is one thing they had in common. Forget that you're a Methodist. Forget that you're a Catholic. Forget that you're a Protestant. Forget that you're a Muslim. Remember that all of us are black and we're catching hell.
Brother Malcolm was not an idiot. He knew that black people could not function in a world all by themselves. He knew that you needed to form alliances with other people, in order to get certain things done.
The struggle in the States between the races has always been bloody, but it has been one-sided. The Negro has been doing most of the bleeding. But I believe he's beginning to feel that bleeding should be reciprocal. It should be done equally on both sides. Everybody should bleed. If the Negro is going to bleed, everybody should bleed. And I think he's beginning to see this, that it should be equalized.
Forces of Western imperialism and its agents has been going on for a long time. On the continents of North and South America, in Asia, in Africa, oppressed peoples have been waging a tireless campaign against domination at the hands of imperialists and their insane doctrine of racial supremacy. But at the very moment when the last outpost of colonialist barbarians seem most comfortable, at the very moment when representatives of the self-styled master race feel most secure and certain of continuing their vicious schemes of enslavement, our people are affirming their humanity. Colored people virtually live as a colonized nation under racist and economic oppression.
Well, for the past 10 years, the struggle in America has been confined to what has been projected to the public as a civil rights struggle. And in that context, it has remained a domestic problem. It has remained within the jurisdiction of the United States. And as such, it has been impossible for the Afro-Americans or American Negroes to try and enlist the support of other dark-skinned people who were being oppressed the world over in that struggle. And the difference now in the direction that the struggle is taking from the direction that the struggle has been going in the past, there are many of our people who are thinking more deeply and more broadly and are beginning to see the importance of lifting it out of the national context or out of the domestic context or beyond the jurisdiction of the United States government. And the only way this can be done is by internationalizing the problem and putting it at a level where it can be taken into the United Nations, and then all of the other independent nations on this earth can involve themselves in our struggle and support us. And the only way by which this can be done, instead of it being called civil rights in the future, we're going to have to label it a human rights struggle or the struggle for human rights. And as such, we can then take it into the United Nations through the avenues that have been set up by the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. We can take our problem before the United Nations in the same manner that the problem of South Africa, Angola, Mozambique, Hungary, the Arab refugee problem, it becomes a world problem. And as a world problem, then the Afro-American or the so-called Negroes have more of a chance of getting some real meaningful results because it's not left up to the one who's responsible for it anymore, but it's put at a level where the whole world can see that our plight is wrong, and they can bring the moral support of the entire world on our side against this force that has stood in our path in the past.
It also makes a difference in the leadership. Those who have been posing as leaders of our people in America in the past, they can pose on this local stage where Uncle Sam is the master of the show and can prop them up and make them look good or make them look better than they actually are by giving them token gains and building them up an image. But when they step onto the international stage or the world stage, then Uncle Sam can't prop them up anymore. And their ability or lack of ability becomes exposed. And if they can lead us forward, they remain leaders. But if they can't, then they have to step aside, and more qualified and bona fide leaders step up from the masses of our people, and then we get faster progress, we get more results.
Malcolm X came from the masses as a genuine leader of his people. He was well aware of the false divisions planted between them, for he himself had overcome many of these artificial barriers to emerge as a voice which raised our strongest demands for freedom and justice in America. This man combined his recognition of the chief enemy of the African and Afro-American people with an objective knowledge of where our strength lay. He talks about the black intellectual, he talks about education, revolutionary education, he talks about the tasks of our women.
Well, in the past, the Afro-American or American Negro intellectual perhaps permitted himself to be used in a way that wasn't really beneficial to the overall Afro-American struggle. But I think today these intellectuals have begun to undertake a new appraisal of the problem, looking at it as it actually is, and are beginning to see it more in the international context and the relation that it has with the African struggle. And the African intellectual is beginning to look at the problem in the African context and see that what might be good in one country, in order for it to be used in another country, has to be rearranged. You take African socialism. Many of the African intellectuals that have analyzed the approach of socialism are beginning to see where the African has to use a form of socialism that fits into the African context, whereas the form that is used in a European country might be good for that particular European country. It doesn't fit as well into the African context. So I think the African intellectual is making that contribution, and he's making it well. One thing that I became aware of in my traveling recently through Africa and the Middle East, in every country that you go to, usually the degree of progress can never be separated from the woman. If you're in a country that's progressive, the woman is progressive. If you're in a country that reflects the consciousness toward the importance of education, it's because the woman is aware of the importance of education. But in every backward country, you'll find the women are backward. And in every country where education is not stressed, it's because the women don't have education. So one of the things I became thoroughly convinced of in my recent travels is the importance of giving freedom to the woman, giving her education, and giving her the incentive to get out there and put that same spirit and understanding in the children. And I frankly am proud of the contribution that our women have made in the struggle for freedom, and I'm one person who's for giving them all of the leeway possible because they've made a greater contribution than many of us men. And one of the best ways that they can help is to encourage the man, try and inspire him to be more militant and turn him away from being nonviolent and passive and meek and Uncle Tomish. Make him aware that the black woman wants to see her man be a man instead of around here using religion as an excuse to be a coward, and some of the things that he's been reflecting here lately. Most people, when we say Afro-American, they think only of the Negroes in the United States, but they don't realize that 2/3 of Brazil consists of people of African blood, which means they're also Afro-American because Brazil is in South America. And in all of these, many of these countries in South America and Central America, and even in Canada, they are heavily populated with people whose ancestors came from Africa. So when you total up the number of Afro-Americans, real Afro-Americans, in the Western Hemisphere, there are perhaps 100 million. And if these people ever unite among themselves, not only is it necessary for the Afro-American in the United States to be organized but it's also necessary for the Afro-Americans in the Caribbean, or the Afro-Cubans, the Afro-Brazilians. It's necessary for all of them to be organized. And then once they are organized in each place, we have to organize among ourselves so that the Afro-American in the United States will be working in conjunction in a coordinated program with those who are in Cuba, and those in Brazil, and those in Venezuela, and those throughout the Caribbean, in Haiti, and in the West Indian Islands. And in this way, we actually get strength. And it's not an accident that there's no organization existing in the Western Hemisphere that's designed toward that end. It would be it would be a direct threat to imperialism as it really exists, and to colonialism as it exists in the West. And one of the things that's going to help to bring this about is the independence of Africa. One of the only reasons that we in the West have never organized, we have hated our image and our African image. And because Africa has been in the hands of people who have created an image of Africa that's negative and hateful. And it has been hateful to us. We haven't wanted to identify with it. But now that Africa is getting independent and in a position to create its own image, and it's a positive image, those of us in the West look at the African image and see how positive it is. We begin to identify with it. We become proud of Africa, and we become proud of our African blood, our African heritage. And this is what is beginning to make the Africans in the Western Hemisphere today develop more race pride, and as this race pride develops, then it has a tendency to make us want to unite together and work together, and your Western imperialists and colonialists consider this to be a grave threat. More threat than communism or Marxism or socialism or anything else. The Africanism is what they consider to be the real threat.
Yes, undoubtedly. One of the major elements at the center of Malcolm X's revolutionary strategy is solidarity, the natural solidarity which must be restored between the Afro-American and his African brother in their common fight against a common enemy.
The Organization of Afro-American Unity sees the only hope for the black man in America in a strong Africa, and the necessity of the Afro-American becoming inseparably linked with the overall program that's existing on the African continent. The two problems must be solved together, and the two forces must go forward together. And so the Organization of Afro-American Unity has a program to link the Afro-Americans with the Africans, and the Africans with the Afro-Americans. When I say Afro-Americans, I mean those throughout the entire Western Hemisphere. This is our only hope. Our hope is in a strong Africa. And when Africa is strong, our position in America will be one of respect. But if Africa is weak, we will never be in a position of respect in America. They used to have a saying that one doesn't have a Chinaman's chance. But they don't say that anymore. They used that expression back when China was weak. But now since Mao Zedong has been successful in making China a strong country, the Chinese have more chance than anybody else. So this saying has become outdated. Well, just as it took a strong China to give a Chinese person respect wherever that Chinese person is found on this earth, when we get a strong Africa, the person of African origin or African ancestry will be respected any place on this earth, even in America. But he will not be respected in America until Africa is strong, just as the Chinaman wasn't respected abroad until China became strong.
He was a leader who knew that self-reliance is the only security for lasting freedom and independence.
Before that meeting, we had a discussion among ourselves, and Malcolm listened very carefully to everything that we said. And when the discussion was over, Malcolm said, no one is to be searched. Even after his house was bombed, he said, no one is to be searched.
Back during slavery, when black people like me talked to the slaves, they didn't kill him. They'd send some old house Negro along behind him to undo what he said. You have to read the history of slavery to understand this. There were two kinds of Negroes. There was that old house Negro and the field Negro. And the house Negro always looked out for his master. When the field Negroes got too much out of line, he held them back in check. He put them back on the plantation. The house Negro could afford to do that because he lived better than the field Negro. He ate better, he dressed better, and he lived in a better house. He lived right up next to his master in the attic or the basement. He ate the same food his master ate and wore his same clothes. And he could talk just like his master, good diction. And he loved his master more than his master loved himself. That's why he didn't want his master hurt. If the master got sick, he'd say, "What's the matter, boss? We sick?" When the master's house caught a fire, he'd try and put the fire out. He didn't want his master's house burned. He never wanted his master's property threatened. And he was more defensive of it than the master was. That was the house Negro. But then you had some field Negroes who lived in huts, had nothing to lose. They wore the worst kind of clothes, they ate the worst food, and they caught hell. They felt the sting of the lash. They hated their master. Oh yes, they did. If the master got sick, they prayed that the master died. If the master's house caught a fire, they prayed for a strong wind to come along. This was the difference between the two. And today you still have house Negroes and field Negroes. I'm a field Negro. In the name of Allah, the all-wise, true and living God. Not a dead God, but a living God. You are gathered here this afternoon to hear the Honorable Elijah Muhammad's message, which you knew in advance was titled Separation or Death. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad has shown us how integration won't work. Since 7 years have passed since the Supreme Court issued the desegregation decision, we only have 6% compliance with that Supreme Court law up at this moment. 6% in 7 years. Less than 1% per year. And these Negro leaders still walking around here thinking the white man is going to bring about integration. We who have had our eyes opened by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad call that token integration. And no one will accept token integration but a child, but children. Is that right or wrong? So the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has taught us, since we see the government itself, with its Army, with its Navy, with its Marines and Air Force, backing up the National Guard, is still incapable of bringing about integration, we reject it. It takes too long, and you don't have that much time left. The press has misled the public. I would like to point out that it is this misrepresentation that has caused people to misunderstand Mr. Muhammad. They say that he deals with the emotions of our people. No. When you tell a man that he's Jim Crow, you're not playing on his emotions. You're telling him the truth. What you talking about? Hold it. When you tell a black man that his neck is being broken on the tree, day in and day out, that he is segregated, Jim Crow, spit upon, deprived of civil rights, and deprived of equal rights, deprived of first-class citizenship. That's not playing on anybody's emotion. That's playing on a man's intelligence. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches black men to go with black women. He says that white women are for white men. And because some of these integration-minded Negroes who have been looking forward all of their life to a time when they could slip into the white neighborhood and slip out with one of your women, when they hear what Mr. Muhammad is saying, they come and whisper in your ear and make you think Mr. Muhammad is teaching hate. No, Mr. Muhammad is teaching black men to leave black women alone, or rather white women alone. He's teaching black men to leave white women alone. And after we wake up, we will see that you leave our black women alone.
is what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us, that we must have separation in order to be equal. We must have separation in order to have freedom. We must have separation in order to have justice. And to get all of this, we have to have some land to do it on.
The murder was going down, and they pushed back in order to help facilitate it.
African Americans, or so-called Negro. One of the reasons that it is bad for us to continue to just refer to ourselves as so-called Negro, that's negative. When we say so-called Negro, that's... Our forefathers weren't the Pilgrims. We didn't land on Plymouth Rock. The rock was landed on us. We were brought here against our will. We were not brought here to be made citizens. We were not brought here to enjoy the constitutional gifts that they speak so beautifully about today. And because we weren't brought here to be made citizens today, now that we've become awakened to some degree and we begin to ask for those things which they say are supposedly for Americans, they look upon us with hostility and unfriendliness. So our unwanted presence, the fact that we are unwanted, is becoming magnified in all of America's preachments today. In the United Nations, you have poor nations. She only has one vote. No matter how wealthy Russia is, she only has one vote. Whereas all the poor nations in Africa who have just emerged into independence, they have each a vote too. And they stick together and are able to outmaneuver the rich nations. This is by having independence and the right to vote in the political world body, it has enabled the dark nations to band together and use the strength of their ballot to force the wealthy nations, which are the white nations, into giving more independence to other nations who are still under their jurisdiction. You and I have to look at this and understand this, that the ballot is as powerful as the bullet. Now, if you and I leave it up to the moderate Negro leaders, they'll be able to trick it up and make the world think that they passed something that doesn't really mean anything. So what you and I have got to do is get involved. You and I have to be right there breathing down their throat. Every time they look over their shoulder, we want them to see us. We want to make them pass the strongest civil rights bill they've ever passed. Because we know even after they pass it, they can't enforce it. In order to do this, we're starting a voters registration drive. We have to get everybody in Harlem registered. Not as Democrats or Republicans, but registered as independents. We're going to organize a corps of brothers and sisters who, after the city is mapped out, they won't leave one apartment house door not knocked on. There won't be a door in Harlem that will not have been knocked on to see that whatever black face lives behind that door is registered to vote by a certain time this year. Nobody will have an excuse not to be registered. We'll ask him, let us see your card. If you don't have the sense of responsibility to get registered, we'll move you out of town. It's going to be the ballot or the bullet. After we get our people registered, we can then organize that voting strength and channel it in the direction that will get immediate results for the benefit of our people. We can sweep our enemies right out of office, but we will not be able to do it sitting around talking about select and elect your own candidates